Hello and welcome guys. Make yourselves comfortable and enjoy. This is Necromancer of the Shadows, Chapter 726. Have you wondered why this secret realm is called the Tomb of the Ancient? When Evan heard Cedar's question, for some reason, his heart started to beat faster. His soul trembled, and he noticed a few soul seals that were placed on his soul were shaking. Although the soul seals were shaking, they remained intact because Evan's soul power was still not strong enough to break them. F***K, don't tell me this messed up man-made realm is also related to me. Evan cursed inwardly when he noticed the reaction of the soul seals. Cedar noticed Evan's strange expression, but he thought he was showing the strange expression because he didn't know why the secret realm was called the Tomb of the Ancient, so he didn't care about it and continued. Normally, the man-made secret realms can't last for long, because they can't support the laws of the world, but the Tomb of the Ancient is completely different, as it can support the laws of the world. In fact, this secret realm can support the laws of the world even better than the secret realms created upon the death of a rank 6 core evolver. Evan's heart started to beat even faster when he heard Cedar's words, and coupled with the name of the secret realm, he already had a guess in his mind as to why this secret realm could support the laws of the world. Why can this man-made secret realm better support the laws of the world than other natural secret realms formed upon the death of the rank 6 core evolvers? Although Evan already had a guess in his mind, he still asked Cedar to confirm his suspicion. Cedar showed a fearful look when he heard Evan and Elle said in a heavy voice, "The reason this secret realm can support the laws of the world is because many rank 5 and some rank 6 core evolvers died inside it." Hearing Cedar's words, Evan's heart trembled, and he took a deep breath to calm himself. The person who created this secret realm killed many rank 5 and some rank 6 core evolvers inside this secret realm. After killing those rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers, he merged their inner world with this secret realm. Along with their inner world, the law seals of those rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers also merged with this secret realm, which allowed it to support the laws of worlds without any problem. Because of thus so many law seals that merged with this world, this secret realm can support the laws of the world even better than the realms that are created upon the death of rank 6 core evolvers. Evan rubbed his eyebrows hearing Cedar because this was exactly what he thought after hearing his earlier words. So the reason this secret realm is called Tomb of the Ancient is because of the death of so many powerhouses who were killed inside it, right? Cedar nodded his head and said with a sigh, "From Grandfather Sylvan, I heard that a rank 5 dryad, who was exiled from our race long ago, was also killed inside this secret realm." Evan's face stiffened when he heard Cedar, and he started to sweat for some reason. "I hope I have nothing to do with the death of this dryad, or else," Evan thought inwardly, feeling his life in Utopia is not going to be easy. Seeing Evan's stiffened face, Cedar thought he was sad to hear about the dryad who had died in that secret realm. So he shook his head and said in a disdainful tone, "You don't have to feel sad about that bastard's death. According to Grandpa Sylvan, he was exiled from the race because he was a lunatic and wanted to kill the Queen of Dryads in order to become the new ruler of the Dryads." Oh, I see. Evan was stunned when Cedar started to comfort him, so he nodded his head with a blank look on his face. Suddenly, he thought about something and asked in a voice filled with hesitation, "By any chance, do you know who created this secret realm and killed those high-level core evolvers?" Hearing Evan, Cedar sighed and shook his head. "No one knows who created the Tomb of the Ancient. According to what I read in the books, this secret realm suddenly appeared a few thousand years ago. Many people tried to find the person who created this secret realm, but no one was able to find him. The high-ranking core evolvers of Utopia wanted to enter this secret realm to investigate about the person who created this secret realm, but there was a restriction on this secret that allowed only rank 2 and below people to enter inside it," Cedar said, and he continued, "Because of the powerful laws of this secret realm, even the rank 5 core evolvers couldn't break the restrictions placed on this realm. The rank 6 core evolvers could forcefully enter the secret realm, but they were afraid that the secret realm would collapse if they forcefully tried to enter it. So the major forces of Utopia decided that only the evolvers of the rank 2 and below would enter it." Evan carefully listened to Cedar and his face turned strange when he heard no now knew who created this secret realm and killed those rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers. "I think I already know who is the bastard who fu***ked those poor rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers," Evan said inwardly. and didn't know whether to feel proud or depressed, that he knew something that no one knew. As he was thinking about the death of rank 5 and rank 6 core revolvers, Evan's face suddenly changed, and his breathing quickened. What if I enter this secret realm and get my hands on the body of a rank 5 or rank 6 core revolver? Evan thought inwardly and gulped down his saliva. Wouldn't I be able to create a rank 5 or rank 6 shadow undead in the future, if I got my hands on the body of one of the poor core revolvers, who was killed by that guy in the Tomb of the Ancient? Chapter 727. Evan and Cedar continued to talk for a few more hours. After inquiring about the Tomb of the Ancient, Evan asked Cedar if he knew anything about the forbidden land of Utopia. In the Tower of Ascension, the spirit of the tower told Evan that if he wanted to speak with the supreme will of Utopia, he would have to go to the forbidden land of Utopia. Unfortunately, Cedar said he never left the Dark Forest, so he did not know anything about the forbidden land of Utopia. Although Evan was disappointed when he heard that Cedar knew nothing about the forbidden land of Utopia, he did not think much of it, because he could still ask Sylvan about it. Even though Sylvan has been living in this closed world for thousands of years, Evan was sure that he must know about the forbidden land of Utopia. Other than the forbidden land, Evan asked Cedar many things about the core revolvers, like how big the difference between each rank is, and what kind of things he needs to keep in mind while cultivating. Cedar was very patient with Evan, and explained everything clearly to him, as he knew that Evan knew nothing about the core revolvers. Cedar told him that the difference between each rank is quite huge. Once a rank 1 core revolver breaks through to rank 2, they will receive a huge boost in their stat points. According to him, an evolver can receive up to 5 times boost in their stat points after breaking through to rank 2. It means that if a normal evolver who trained their body to its limits, and increased all of their stat points to 40, breaks through to rank 2, and receives a 5-time boost, all of their stats will be 200 points upon becoming a beginner level rank 2 core revolver. Of course, it is very rare for people to receive a 5 times boost upon breaking through to rank 2. Most people receive 2.5 times, 3 times, or even 1.5 times boost. Evan was quite shocked when he heard even a beginner level rank 2 core revolver can have 200 points in each stat, and he was even more shocked when Cedar told him about anomalies, who can have more than 200 stat points. Evan even asked Cedar about his stat points, and when Cedar told him that all of his stat points were near 500, he was completely speechless. Cedar had a limit of 65 points when he was a rank 1 core revolver, and he increased all of his stat points to their limit before breaking through to rank 2. When he became a rank 2 core revolver, he received 5-time boost in his stat points, which is why his stat points were so high. I definitely need to create some strong shadow undeads, otherwise, it would be impossible for me to beat rank 2 core revolvers with my meager stat points. This was Evan's first thought after seeing Cedar's stat points. When Cedar saw Evan's stunned expression after hearing about his stat points, he told him that the stat points are important, but the most important thing is the domain and the zone of the evolvers. If the domain of a person is far stronger than his opponent, then that person can defeat his opponent without much problem, even if there is quite some difference in their stat points. Cedar advised him that he should create a firm domain, because it will be the foundation of his inner world in the future. If his domain is not strong enough, he will never be able to evolve it into a zone, and will be stuck as a rank 1 core evolver for the rest of his life. Cedar also told him to use the different kinds of training rooms in the training area to train himself. Evan asked Cedar a few other questions, and when they finished, it was already late at night. Although Evan was currently inside a hidden world that Sylvan created with the help of the world tree, it looks no different than the outside world, and the cycle of the day and night were the same as the outside world. I should get going now. I will come back tomorrow to take you to meet with other dryads, Cedar said, after noticing it was already late at night. Evan nodded his head and walked out of the house with Cedar. Before Cedar left, Evan suddenly thought about something and asked, "By the way, is there a market here where I can buy some rank 1 herbs?" Rank 1 herbs? Cedar raised an eyebrow when he heard Evan. "Are you an alchemist?" he asked with a look of interest on his face. "No, but I can summon a monster who can do alchemy, so I want to buy a few things." Cedar was surprised when he heard Evan could summon a monster who could do alchemy, Because of the absurdity of the situation, Sylvan didn't tell him that Evan is the son of the Shadow Monarch, so Cedar didn't know much about him. Although he was surprised to hear Evan could summon a monster, he did not ask anything, and just nodded his head. There is a market here. I will bring you there tomorrow. Thanks. Evan's eyes lit up when he heard Cedar, and he said in a grateful voice, "Don't mention it." Cedar nodded his head with a smile on his face and left from there. Evan watched Cedar flying away, and once he disappeared from his sight, he returned back to the training room. After coming back to the training room, he first switched on the restrictions of the training room that Cedar told him about earlier, so that no one would be able to spy on him. Once the restrictions of the training area were activated, Evan looked at his shadow, and his eyes flashed. Because of what happened earlier, he did not get a chance to take a closer look at his shadow undeads after they evolved into rank 1 core evolvers. Let's see how much they improved after becoming a rank 1 core evolvers, Evan muttered, and summoned his shadow undeads from his shadow storage. Chapter 728. Evan didn't summon all of his shadow undeads. Instead, he only summoned his main shadow undeads, like Eclipse, Alisia, Necros, Hana, Snow, Aqua, Volak, Gobu, Kazal, Albelu and a few others. You guys can speak now, right? Evan asked, looking at Albelu, Snow, Aqua and a few other of his shadow undeads, who couldn't speak before. Yes, Master. All of his shadow undeads spoke at the same time, sounding quite excited. Evan's lips arched upwards when he saw that Snow and his other shadow undeads could now speak without any problem. Evan first noticed that his shadow undeads could now speak when he ordered them to attack Ashley. At that time, Necros shouted something like smash while swinging his fist towards Ashley. Although he was killed by Ashley with a wave of her hand, Evan was still surprised because before becoming rank 1 core evolver, Necros couldn't speak. Well, now they are not undeads anymore because of the Transcendent Core, so it is not surprising that they can speak after becoming rank 1 core evolvers, Evan said as he looked at the shadow undeads standing in front of him. I need to organize my shadow undeads, probably otherwise it would be difficult for them to show their full potential. After becoming a rank 1 core evolver, Evan can now create 15,000 shadow undeads. If he doesn't organize his shadow undeads properly, it would be impossible for them to show their full power. I will create different legions of shadow undeads and divide them into smaller groups. This way, it will be easier to handle them. After deciding what to do with his shadow undeads, Evan thought about what Cedar said earlier, and looked at his shadow undeads with a look of interest on his face. I wonder what is the limit of my shadow undeads. Now that Evan knew there were some people who could surpass the limit of 40 points in their stats, he wondered if there were any shadow undeads in his army who could exceed this limit. Unknown to Evan, the limit of all of his shadow undeads is 60 points because of their transcendent core, and some shadow undeads can even go past that limit. A/N. In chapter 709, I mistakenly showed Ash's stamina as 34 points. I have already corrected it, as all of you know the stamina of all his shadow undead is infinite. Cedar told me that there is a treasure called the Body Limit Crystal that can determine the limit of your body. According to him, Sylvan has one of those crystals. If I want to see the limit of me and my shadow undeads, I will have to ask him. Evan muttered in a low voice and thought about using the second effect of the growth link to look at the status window of his shadow undeads. Evan didn't care much about the stat points of his shadow undeads for the time being. Instead, he was interested in their skill section to see if any of them had awoken any authority. Due to the improvement in the second effect of his growth link skill, Evan can now take one authority of his shadow undeads, in addition to their skills. Knowing the powers of the authorities, Evan obviously wanted to see if any of his shadow undeads had awakened a powerful authority that he could take using his growth link skill. Just when Evan was about to open the status window of Eclipse to see if he had awakened any authority, whoosh! A bright light erupted from the body of one of his shadow undeads. Evan was startled because of the sudden eruption of light, and looked at the shadow undead who was causing trouble. This girl is like a troublesome kid who likes to cause problems for their parents wherever she goes, Evan muttered with a speechless look on his face, while looking at Alisia who was glowing like a lantern. Alisia, stop messing aero, Evan wanted to scold Alisia, but his words stuck in his mouth as the light around her suddenly spread outward and covered an area of 100 meters. Evan's eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, and his breathing quickened when he saw this. He looked at the area of 100 meters around him that was covered in light, and felt the heavy restriction on his body. After looking at the strange light around him for a moment, Evan glanced back at Alisia, who was standing with his other shadow undeads, with a confused look on her face. Seeing the look of confusion on Alisia's face as if she didn't know what she had just done, Evan really wanted to bonk her head. Although he really wanted to beat her, he took a deep breath to calm down, and asked in a trembling voice, "Alisia, how did you create your domain so quickly?" Looking at Alisia, Evan could feel conceptual energy flowing inside her body, which meant she had already turned 25% of her world essence into conceptual energy. Not only had she turned 25% of her world essence into conceptual energy, but she had also created her domain. Evan really wanted to know what the FU*K was going on. He has been working his A*S off for the past 7 months to turn his world essence into the conceptual energy of void, but even then he had just transformed only 10% of his world essence. But Alisia, who became rank 1 core evolver just a few hours ago, had already turned 25% of her world essence into conceptual energy, and even created a domain. When Alisia heard Evan's question, the confusion on her face increased even more. "What domain, master?" Seeing the confused look on Alisia's face, Evan clutched his chest, and even though he was a rank 1 core evolver, he felt as if he was going to die of a heart attack. He really felt like this lass was messing with him, while Evan was trying his best not to die because of a heart attack in a faraway place. A beautiful golden-haired elf woman wearing a long red dress frowned. Her deep green eyes flashed with a strange light as she examined her core using her spiritual senses. "Why do I feel like my inner world is reacting to something?" Alisia muttered, looking at her monic core that was glowing like a star. Chapter 729. Evan walked out of the training room and rubbed his eyebrows. He glanced outside the house and noticed it was already morning. "Cedar will be here soon," Evan muttered and looked at his sweaty appearance. "I should take a shower before he comes." Cedar had mentioned that he would introduce other dryads to him today. Evan thought it would not be appropriate for him to meet them while covered in sweat. As Evan entered the bathroom and switched on the shower, his mind recalled the things that happened last night. Alisia was the essence clone of a world-level expert, Evan said, as cold drops of water fell on his body. Evan first met Alisia in the ruins of the Verdant Wilds dungeon. At that time, Evan didn't know anything about the essence clones, so he just thought that she was another monster of the dungeon, who looked like an elf. But later, he realized that Alisia was different from normal monsters, and her powers were far stronger than other monsters who were at the same rank as her. "I never thought that she would recall memories about the conceptual energy and domain," Evan muttered, feeling things regarding Alisia will not be simple in the future. When Evan asked Alisia how she created her domain so quickly, she told him that she just recalled some strange memories after becoming a rank 1 core evolver. When she sorted out those memories, she found those memories were information about the conceptual energy of light and domain. When Evan summoned his shadow undeads in the training area last night, she was still digesting those memories at that time, and the moment she finished digesting those memories, her understanding of the conceptual energy of light increased to a completely different level. Because of her high understanding of conceptual energy, her world essence started to change into the conceptual energy of light. In just a few seconds, 25% of her world essence was transformed into conceptual energy. She felt she could transform more of her world essence, but she would need to break through to rank 2 before she could continue to transform her world essence. Once 25% of her world essence turned into conceptual energy, the memories she recalled regarding the domain came into play, and she unknowingly created her domain. When Evan heard Alisia's explanation last night, he was so dumbfounded that he didn't know what to say. After some time, when he calmed down and asked her if she remembered anything else besides the information about the conceptual energy and domain, she told him that she had a faint feeling that she is somehow connected to a world-level expert. When Evan heard this, he immediately concluded that Alisia was definitely the essence clone of a world-level expert. After confirming that Alisia was an essence clone, another question arose in Evan's mind. If she was an essence clone and not a real person, then how did he successfully turn her into a shadow undead? According to his understanding of the essence clones, It should be impossible for him to turn an essence clone into a shadow undead. After all, an essence clone is not a living being. It is just a clone made from the energy of a high-level core evolver. Although an essence clone can act like a living person, it is mainly due to the small portion of the soul that it possesses. In order to give the essence clone an ego, it is necessary to plant a very small portion of the soul into it. This portion of the soul can be said to be negligible, because it is so small that even if someone destroys it, the creator of the essence clone will recover in just a few months without doing anything. It is impossible for me to turn an essence clone into a shadow undead unless Evan muttered and narrowed his eyes. There were two reasons that Evan could think of as to why he was successfully able to turn Alisia into a shadow undead. First, the person who created Alisia and sent her to Aurora World planted a very large portion of her soul into her, and because of an unexpected accident, that large portion of the soul turned into a completely different soul. A soul that was not connected to anyone and was a completely different entity. In other words, that essence clone was a bit similar to Hana. Just like how Hana came into existence from a part of Claire's soul, Alisia is the same. However, according to Evan's understanding, no one would plant a large portion of their soul into an essence clone, because it is very dangerous. If they plant a large portion of their soul into an essence clone, it would be dangerous for them. If anyone destroys that essence clone, along with that portion of the soul, people can afford small injuries to their souls. But if their souls get severely injured, there is a high chance that they will lose their lives. Because of this reason, Evan believed that the person who created Alisia didn't plant a large portion of her soul inside her, which led him towards his second guess. The reason I was able to turn Alisia into a shadow undead was because of my shadow energy, Evan muttered, looking at the black energy inside his core. Evan knows that his shadow energy is made from the combination of 3 different kinds of conceptual energy. The first energy is obviously the conceptual energy of death. Till now, other than the conceptual energy of death, Evan didn't know what the other 2 energies were. But now he was absolutely sure about the second energy that was mixed in his shadow energy. The conceptual energy of soul, Evan said as his eyes flashed with bright light. The moment Evan said these words, some of the soul seals placed on his soul started to shake. Looks like my guess is correct, Evan said in a neutral tone, seeing the reaction of his soul seals. According to Evan's guess, the conceptual energy of the soul that is mixed inside his shadow energy did something which allowed him to turn Alisia, someone who had a very small portion of the soul, into a shadow undead. Although Evan felt his guess was very close to the truth, deep in his heart, there was a voice telling him that he was still missing something crucial, something that was very deeply related to his existence. I need to break these soul seals if I want to receive the answers to these questions, Evan said as he turned off the shower and left the bathroom after cleaning himself. After leaving the bathroom, he suddenly recalled something and his lips curved upwards. I might have to face some problems in the future because of Alisia's origin, but for now, I at least got a broken authority from her that is very useful for me, Evan said, looking at his status window with a satisfied expression on his face. Blessed by light, passive authority. Decrease the consumption of your world essence and conceptual energy by 50%. Chapter 730. Evan used the wind manipulation skill to dry himself in just a few seconds. After drying off, he put on a new set of clothes and headed outside. The morning sun was shining brightly, and as Evan looked at the river flowing down from the top of the mountain, he felt his chaotic mind calming down. Evan was still looking at the river when he suddenly felt someone coming towards him at rapid speed. He turned around and saw Cedar coming towards him. Good morning. Cedar arrived in front of him in just a few seconds, and greeted him with a smile on his face. Good morning, quote. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar and asked after a moment. So, where are we going first? Let's go to the market first. I will introduce you to other dryads after that. Sure, Evan didn't object to Cedar's suggestion, and both of them flew away from there. Other than the herbs, you can buy many other things in the market like weapons, artifacts and different kinds of treasures. As they flew towards the market, Cedar started to explain to Evan. Evan listened to Cedar carefully and was surprised when he heard that he could even buy domain stones in the market. Evan was excited after hearing he could buy domain stones in the market. Although he already had one domain stone and he even connected it to the rune of evolution to increase its grade, he still wanted to buy more of them. The reason he wanted to buy more domain stones was because of his shadow undeads. With the help of the domain stones, his shadow undeads will be able to create their domains much faster. But when he asked Cedar about the price of the domain stones, he immediately wiped out the thought of buying them for his shadow undeads. 5 million low-level essence stones, oh my. Even though he had more than 8 million essence stones, he couldn't just spend them on the domain stones. After learning about the price of domain stones, Evan asked Cedar about the price of rank 1 herbs. Before leaving for the market, he had thought that the price of rank 1 herbs wouldn't be high. However, after hearing the price of the domain stone, Evan wasn't so sure anymore. A normal low-level rank 1 herb will cost you from 100,000 to 200,000 low-level essence stones, Cedar replied after hearing Evan's question. Evan was dumbfounded when he heard the price for the normal rank 1 herb. Evan had about 8 million essence stones that he received from the 4 great clans of Eldoria City. Thinking about the millions of essence stones that were inside his shadow storage, Evan thought that he was quite wealthy. But only now did he realize that he was actually quite poor. He wanted to buy herbs for Amara, so that she could practice her alchemy skills and become a proper rank 1 alchemist. In order for her to learn alchemy properly, he would need to buy a large amount of herbs. But if a single herb is going to cost him 100,000 essence stones, then there is no way he can buy a large amount of herbs with his current wealth. Moreover, essence stones also have grades. There are 3 grades of the essence stones: low level, mid level and high level. 1 mid level essence stone is worth 100 low level essence stones, and 1 high level essence stone is worth 100 mid level essence stones. Looking at the mountain of essence stones inside his shadow storage, Evan realized that all the essence stones he brought from the world domain were of low grades. "Hello honey," a voice suddenly echoed inside Evan's mind. Evan was not surprised when he heard this voice because he was very familiar with this voice. It was the voice of his long-lost girlfriend. Yes, it was the voice of poverty. "This bit*h poverty once again came into my life to mess with me," Evan cursed inwardly, feeling depressed. Seeing Evan's depressed expression, Cedar felt confused and didn't understand what was wrong with him. But he soon realized the problem and nodded his head in understanding. He just arrived in Utopia a few days ago, so it is impossible for him to have enough essence stones to buy those expensive things, Cedar said inwardly and took out a storage ring. "Here, you can use these to buy the things that you need," he said and handed down the storage ring to Evan. Evan was stunned when Cedar suddenly placed a storage ring in his hand. He looked inside the ring using his spiritual senses, and his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. "What the quote?" Evan looked at Cedar with a face full of disbelief, not believing his eyes. There were 1 million essence stones inside the storage ring, but all of them were mid-level essence stones. "If I convert them into low-level essence stones, that will be 100 million essence stones," Evan said inwardly, and felt his mind going numb because of so much wealth. "No, I can't accept this." After a few minutes, Evan finally came back to his senses and tried to give the storage ring back to Cedar. But Cedar shook his head and waved his hand. "It's fine. I am just lending them to you. Just make sure you return them to me in the future when you have enough," Cedar said, and did not take the storage ring back. Even after hearing Cedar, Evan still wanted to give back the storage ring to him, but thinking about the things that he could buy with this wealth, he decided to keep them for the time being. "I need to increase my strength before the Tomb of the Ancient opens," Evan said to himself. "I will return him his essence stones when I have enough." While Evan was thinking about the essence stones, Cedar suddenly looked at him and asked with a strange look on his face, "By the way, what is wrong with your world essence? I don't know why, but I am feeling it is very different than yesterday." Evan looked at Cedar in confusion hearing his question, but suddenly, something clicked in his mind, and he thought about the new passive authority that he took from Alisia. Is it because of this authority? Evan asked himself, looking at the authority that he took from Alisia, using the second effect of the growth link skill. Although he was not sure, Evan felt the change Cedar felt in his world essence might be related to the passive authority that he took from Alisia. Just when he was thinking about how to explain this to Cedar, he heard Cedar's excited voice. "We are here." Evan looked in front of him, and his expression turned strange, because instead of a market, he saw a small building in front of him. Evan wanted to ask Cedar what was that building, But when he looked at Cedar, his expression froze because he saw him wearing a strange mask. Just when Evan was getting confused, he heard Cedar's voice, and his expression changed. I can finally go out from this closed world for the first time. Chapter 731. The Dark Forest is divided into 3 parts. The outer area, the inner area, and the central area, covering an area of approximately 3 million miles. The territory of the Dark Forest is filled with rare treasures and resources. However, along with these treasures and resources, there are also many dangers inside it. The deeper you venture into the forest, the more dangerous it becomes. The ruler of the Dark Forest is said to be a monster who is a world realm expert. It is because of this monster that other forces of Utopia let the Dark Forest remain a neutral territory where anyone could enter. Otherwise, with the abundance of resources in the Dark Forest, many top forces would have already started a war to conquer it. The hidden world of the Dryads is located in the central area of the Dark Forest. Due to the fear of being killed by the ruler of the Dark Forest, most people do not dare to enter the central area of the forest. As a result, no one has been able to find their hidden world for the past thousands of years. At this moment, in one of the caves located in the outer area of the Dark Forest, a white light flashed and 2 handsome-looking elves appeared there. One was a brown-skinned elf with shoulder-length hair, covered in the aura of nature. On the other hand, the second one was a fair-skinned elf, emitting a demonic aura instead of the aura of nature. So, now we are in the outer area of the Dark Forest, Evan asked while looking around him. Cedar, who had changed his appearance using an artifact, nodded his head and walked towards the exit of the cave. Evan followed after Cedar, and soon both of them emerged from the cave. The outside of the cave was filled with the signature towering trees of the Dark Forest, which blocked all the sunlight. However, compared to the trees Evan had seen in the central area of the Dark Forest, these trees were still quite short. After exiting the cave, Evan looked behind him and was surprised because the entrance of the cave from which he had just come out suddenly disappeared, and in its place appeared a mountain wall. Cedar smiled when he saw Evan's surprised expression. This cave is surrounded by a special formation. You won't be able to enter it unless you are a dryad, and even if you somehow enter it by chance, the teleportation formation inside the cave would self-destruct the moment of intrusion. Evan nodded his head in understanding hearing Cedar, and looked at him with a strange look on his face. Earlier, you said it is your first time coming to the outside world. Are you sure you know where the nearest city is located, and we won't get lost in the Dark Forest? The building where Cedar brought Evan earlier was actually a teleportation building. Inside that building, Ashley had created many teleportation formations that were connected with the different parts of Utopia. According to Cedar, it took Ashley nearly 50 years to complete that teleportation building, and it is now connected with most of the parts of Utopia. Don't worry, Grandpa Sylvan used an experience crystal on me to share all of the things that I need to know, Cedar said in a confidence-filled voice upon hearing Evan. Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar and was curious about the experience crystal, but he didn't ask anything for now, and just nodded his head. We will need to travel for a few hours to leave the Dark Forest. After leaving the Dark Forest, we will need to travel for around 1 day to reach the Star City, which is our destination, Cedar said after recalling a few things. Evan was not surprised when he heard it would take them nearly 1 day to reach the nearest city. Even though with their high speed they could cover a few 100,000 kilometers of distance in 1 day, one has to know that Utopia can only be described in one word: vast. Utopia is so vast that if someone tries to go from Elvenshine, the Empire of Elves located in the northern territory of Utopia, to Gehenna Empire, the Empire of Demons, located in the southern territory of Utopia, without using a teleportation formation, it would take them a few months or even years, even if they are rank 3 core evolvers. Once Cedar confirmed the direction of the exit of the Dark Forest, Evan and he quickly started to move. Before using the teleportation formation to come here, Evan had asked Cedar if they would have to face monsters while leaving the forest, but Cedar told him that the formation would teleport them to the outermost region of the Dark Forest, and this area is only filled with the monsters who are S rank or below, so even if they encounter any monster, it wouldn't be a problem for them. Evan was disappointed when he heard this because he wanted to kill a few high-ranking monsters, so that he could turn them into his shadow undeads. Although he was disappointed, he didn't think too much about it, and decided to go into the deeper area of the Dark Forest, after coming back to create some stronger shadow undeads. As they were moving towards the exit of the forest, Evan suddenly thought about something. By the way, is there no market inside the closed world where dryads lives? Evan asked this question because he did not think that Cedar would bring him to the outside world. Hearing Evan, a sad look crossed Cedar's face, and he shook his head. The population of dryads is barely a few thousand, and the closed world can't produce many resources that can be used for cultivation. There is a market there, but it is useless for the likes of us, because we won't be able to find anything useful there. Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar, and didn't know what to say, so he chose to remain silent. As far as he knew, most of the dryads were killed in the war against the elves a few thousand years ago, and not many survived. The world tree of Drades and the tree of life of the elves, Evan said inwardly, remembering the reason behind the war. From what he knows, the war happened because the elves wanted to snatch the world tree from the dryads, and many people guessed that it had something to do with their divine tree, the tree of life. I wonder if both of these trees are related to the universal tree, Evan thought, feeling things were very complicated. Cedar and Evan continued to move towards the exit of the dark forest. And just as Cedar said, the outer area of the dark forest was mostly devoid of monsters, and they didn't encounter any danger. Around 3 hours later, the signature towering trees of the dark forest started to disappear. We are about to exit the forest, Cedar said when he noticed the change in the environment around them. Evan nodded his head hearing him, and at the same time, his spiritual senses spotted many people camping just outside of the forest. Chapter 732. They are the people who came here in search of rare treasures and to train themselves, Cedar explained to Evan, when both of them noticed there were many people camping outside of the dark forest. With his spiritual senses, Evan noticed that all the people who were camping outside of the forest were divided into different kinds of groups. There were groups of demons, beastkins, humans, dwarfs, and many other different races. Evan even noticed a group of elves. Upon seeing the group of elves, killing intent flashed inside Cedar's eyes, but he forcefully suppressed it. There is no one here who is above rank 2, Evan said to himself, after looking at the groups of the people who were camping outside of the dark forest. He was not surprised when he saw there was no one whose rank was higher than 2, because the people who were camping outside mainly came to explore the outer area of the dark forest. The outer area of the dark forest is only useful for evolvers who are rank 2 or below, so the people who are above rank 2 will naturally move into the inner area of the dark forest instead of camping here. We will ignore them and move towards the city after leaving the forest, Cedar said to Evan just before they left the forest. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar as he was thinking the same. In less than a minute, Evan and Cedar reached the end of the dark forest and arrived in the open area where people of different kinds of races were camping. Just as Evan and Cedar noticed them with their spiritual senses, people who were keeping an eye on the surroundings also noticed them. So, when both of them exited the forest, many people looked in their direction. Evan and Cedar ignored the glances that were directed towards them and continued to move forward after leaving the forest. Many people looked at them, but no one tried to stop them. Even the group of elves who were camping outside just glanced at them and didn't care much. There were many people who came to try their luck in the dark forest, so they were not surprised upon seeing them. As they moved forward, Evan couldn't help but frown. For some reason, he felt many people were looking at him with a scornful look. Cedar also noticed this anomaly, and frowned upon seeing the scornful glances directed towards Evan. But soon something clicked in his mind, and he sneered inwardly, finally understanding why they were looking at Evan like this. Hypocritical bastards, Cedar said and signaled Evan to speed up. Evan nodded his head seeing Cedar's signal, and both of them quickly left from there. Soon, Cedar and Evan were far away from the dark forest, and they couldn't feel anyone's presence around them. Even after leaving that area, Evan was still wondering why people were looking at him with a scornful look. Is it because I am just a beginner level rank 1 core evolver? Evan thought inwardly, but he quickly dispelled this thought as he even noticed some S-rankers were also giving him scornful looks. If it was because of his rank, then the people who were lower rank than him wouldn't have looked at him like that. Are you wondering why they were giving you a scornful look? Cedar asked when he saw the confused look on Evan's face. Yes. Evan nodded when he heard Cedar and asked him in a curious voice. Do you know why? Cedar smiled when he heard Evan and said in a voice filled with disdain. They were looking at you like that because they thought you were a half-elf. Half-elf. Evan raised an eyebrow, and for some reason every fiber of his being felt disgusted when he heard Cedar's words. Cedar nodded his head and said in a helpless voice, "Your look is very similar to an elf, but the aura around you is very different from an elf, which is why most of the people who saw you earlier must have thought that you are a half-elf. Is there much discrimination against mixed blood in Utopia ? Evan asked with a frown on his face. Not all the races discriminate against the mixed bloods, but the situation of the half-elves is quite different. I see. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar, and didn't really care about what the people thought about him. He wasn't even interested in hearing why the situation of half-elves was different from others, because, for some reason, he felt disgusted just thinking about how his race was being mistaken as another race again and again by people. There was a strange sense of superiority deep inside him. This sense of superiority was rooted deep inside his blood, and it didn't want him to compare himself with other people. Not just half-elf, he felt it was an insult to him to be compared with any other race. Cedar noticed that Evan didn't want to talk about this topic, so he didn't choose to continue. Using their high agility, both of them moved towards the Star City at rapid speed. On the way to the city, they encountered many people who were similar to them, either going towards the city or heading to the dark forest in search of fortune. Cedar and Evan continued to move for hours without taking any breaks. Around 10 hours later, when it was completely dark, both of them stopped near a mountain area. "Let's spend the night here. We will move once again tomorrow morning," Cedar suggested after scanning the area around them with his spiritual senses. Evan nodded his head, feeling a little tired after continuously moving for hours without taking any breaks. Seeing Evan nodding his head, Cedar took out wood from his storage ring and lit up a campfire. Although both of them could clearly see even in this dark environment, they still needed the flame in order to cook their food. As the fire illuminated their surroundings, Cedar looked at Evan, who sat on the opposite side to him, and sighed inwardly. "I hope the incident that happened earlier won't affect our journey." Chapter 733. Cedar took out 2 pieces of meat from his storage ring and started to roast them on the fire. Evan looked at the 2 pieces of meat that Cedar took out, and his eyes flashed. Just by feeling the amount of world essence and concentrated energy inside the meat, he could tell that this meat came from at least a rank 2 monster. Suddenly, something clicked in Evan's mind, and he looked at Cedar with a strange look on his face. "I thought dryads don't eat meat." Hearing Evan, Cedar looked at him in confusion. "Who told you that dryads don't eat meat?" "Some novels that I read in my past life," Evan thought to himself, but he obviously didn't say it out loud, and just made a random excuse. "No one told me. I just thought that dryads only eat fruits, vegetables, leaves, and maybe grass." Cedar opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. After a full minute of silence, he finally came back to his senses, and asked with a speechless look on his face, "Are you sure you are talking about dryads and not sheep, Evan? How long do you think it will take for the meat to be fully cooked?" Seeing the way Cedar was looking at him, Evan wisely decided to change the topic. Cedar stared at Evan for a few seconds before looking at the meat. 1 hour should be enough. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar and kept his mouth shut. Time passed, and 1 hour later, the meat was fully cooked. "Here you go." Cedar placed one of the pieces of the meat, which had turned light golden brown, onto a plate, and gave it to Evan. Evan took the meat and noticed that the large amount of world essence and energy that was inside the meat had fully fused with it. "It looks quite delicious," Evan said to himself, looking at the light golden color of the meat, and took a bite. The moment Evan took a bite, his eyes opened wide in shock. The taste of this meat is." Evan looked at Cedar, who was eating the meat calmly, and his mouth twitched uncontrollably. "The taste of this meat is similar to the cheapest meat that I used to buy in Aurora World." While Evan was still in disbelief because of the ordinary taste of the meat, the world essence inside his body suddenly became active. "This is the meat of a peak rank 2 monster." Cedar took a bite and said with a smile on his face, "Try your best to absorb all the energy inside it, and you should be able to increase the rank of your core slightly." Hearing Cedar, Evan looked at him with an expressionless face and took another bite. "Just what kind of cooking talent do you need to have to turn the meat of a rank 2 monster into something that tastes like the cheapest meat available in the market?" Once they finished eating, Evan's body was filled with the world essence. Go ahead and refine the world essence inside your body. I will keep watch, Cedar offered. Evan shook his head hearing Cedar and looked at his shadow. You don't need to keep watch. They will tell us if they notice anything strange. As Evan spoke, his shadow undeads started to come out of his shadow storage one after another. Cedar looked at the thousands of rank 1 shadow undeads that appeared out of nowhere, and his eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. Didn't I tell you I can summon monsters? Seeing the shocked look on Cedar's face, Evan said with a smile on his face. You did say that you can summon monsters. But this Cedar was lost for words, seeing nearly 1,000 shadow undeads that Evan summoned and didn't know what to say. After a minute, he finally came back to his senses, and took a deep look at Evan. With the help of these 1,000 summoned monsters, he might even be able to fight against the newly promoted rank 2 core evolvers, who just created their zone, Cedar said to himself, looking at Evan with a weird look on his face. Evan was just a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, but Cedar had seen with his own eyes how he had defeated a peak rank 1 elf puppet without much problem. Although he could also defeat a peak rank 1 core evolver, when he was a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, he had to use all of his means in order to win. On the other hand, Cedar was sure that when Evan defeated that elf puppet, he did not even use his full power. Is something wrong? Evan asked when he saw how Cedar was looking at him. Hearing Evan, Cedar took a deep breath and shook his head. Are you sure it is fine? I mean, don't you need to continuously use your world essence in order to keep these 1,000 summoned monsters here? Evan didn't summon all 4,000 shadow undeads, because he felt it was unnecessary. 1,000 rank 1 shadow undeads were more than enough to keep an eye on the hundreds of kilometers of the area around them. Don't worry, I can keep them here without any problem. Cedar's eyes flashed when he heard Evan, but he didn't say anything and just nodded his head. Seeing Cedar nodding his head, Evan ordered his shadow undeads to spread in the surroundings, and asked them to inform him if they noticed anything unusual. Once his shadow undead spread in the surroundings, Evan sat down and started to refine the world essence that he received after eating the meat. Cedar scanned their surroundings using his spiritual senses, and after confirming Evan's shadow undeads were keeping watch everywhere, he also sat down and started to cultivate. Although the effect of the rank 2 meat was negligible on him, it was still better than nothing. 2 hours later, Evan slowly opened his eyes, and a look of joy flashed on his face. After refining the energy of the rank 2 meat, the level of his core increased a little. If I use the rank 2 meat and the essence gathering room that is inside the house, I should be able to reach the mid-level of rank 1 in less than 1 month, Evan said to himself, and took a deep breath. He was already planning to hunt some high-ranking monsters in the dark forest after going back, so that he could create high-level shadow undeads. And after knowing the effect of the rank 2 meat, his determination to kill high-level monsters increased even more. He looked at Cedar and saw he was still cultivating. The world essence from the surroundings was moving towards him, and Cedar's core was absorbing all the world essence like a black hole. There is still a few hours before the sun rises. I should also cultivate a bit more, Evan muttered and closed his eyes. But not even a minute later, Evan suddenly opened his eyes, and a cold light flashed inside them. Eclipse was just killed by someone. Chapter 734. Evan stood up with a serious look on his face, and used his world essence to summon back Eclipse. Eclipse didn't even get a chance to send him a message before he died. It means that the person who killed him was not weak. The world essence inside Evan's core moved, and soon Eclipse's figure appeared in front of him. He was about to ask him what had happened when, boom, he heard the sound of fighting from the far distance, and powerful energy waves spread in all directions. It seems we have some uninvited guests. Cedar opened his eyes and sighed while looking in the direction from where he could hear the sound of fighting. Evan used his shadow senses and connected his vision with one of the shadow undead who was in that area. Upon connecting his vision with the shadow undead, Evan saw 8 people coming in their direction. Beastkin's Evan raised an eyebrow when he saw the animal-like features of the 8 people. The 2 people in the lead had lion-like features and a golden mane around their neck. His shadow undeads tried to stop them, but the 2 people in front easily stopped the attacks of his shadow undeads, and destroyed them without any problem with a slash of their claw-like hands. Both of them are at least mid-level rank 2 core evolvers. Evan narrowed his eyes when he saw the 2 people in front, who were destroying his shadow undeads. They are coming in our direction. It seems they already know we are here. Cedar stood up and said in a calm voice, as if he was not surprised by the sudden attack. Noticing Cedar's calm look, Evan raised an eyebrow. Did you already know about them? He asked in a surprised tone. Cedar shook his head hearing Evan. I didn't know about them, but I expected that some uninvited guests would come after us. Hearing Cedar, Evan looked at him without saying anything. After a moment, he opened his mouth and asked, are they here because of me? Cedar smiled bitterly hearing Evan and nodded his head. Although I'm not 100% certain, but the chances are pretty high that they are here because of you. Evan's eyes narrowed upon Cedar's confirmation, and he already had a guess in his mind. Are they here because of my appearance, which is similar to half-elves? He asked with a frown on his face. Cedar nodded his head and was about to explain the reason to Evan when he noticed something, and his eyes flashed. They are here. Evan looked in front of him and saw the 8 Beastkin people whom he had seen earlier using his spiritual senses coming towards them. Most of his shadow undeads were killed by the 2 people who were in front of the group. After seeing they were no match for them, Evan ordered his other shadow undeads to retreat. In just a few seconds, the 8 people arrived near them and stopped only 100 meters away from them. One peak and one middle stage of rank 2. Now that the 8 people were in front of them, Cedar easily perceived the ranks of the 2 lion-type people who were in the lead of the group. He didn't really care about the other 6 people who were at the back because 2 among the 6 were S-rankers, while the other 4 were rank 1 core revolvers. See Kale, didn't I tell you he is a top-grade commodity? We can definitely get a few million high-level essence stones if we capture him, the mid-level rank 2 core revolver said to the peak rank 2 core revolver. Kale looked at Cedar for a few seconds and felt the brown dash. Skinned elf was not simple, but after feeling the aura of mid-dash, level rank 2 core revolver around him, he stopped looking at him and looked at Evan, who was standing with a frown on his face. Indeed, he is far better than the previous bastards that we captured before. Evan didn't know why, but he felt quite uncomfortable when he saw how Kale and others were looking at him. Hey Cedar, what are these ****s talking about? Cedar glanced at Evan from the corner of his eyes, and noticing the frown on his face, he said in a low voice, they want to capture you so that they can sell you as a slave. Slave. For some reason, Evan felt as if something inside him shook when he heard that word. Didn't I tell you before, the situation of the half-elves is not good in Utopia, Cedar said in a low voice. Most people don't care about the mixed bloods, but the half-elves are different. Cedar continued to speak and explained Evan about the situation of the half-elves. But he didn't notice that Evan had long since stopped listening to him, and his eyes were completely blank. Slave. After hearing that word, Evan suddenly found himself standing in a dark room. A strong smell of blood assaulted his nostrils, and when he looked around him, he saw tens of dead bodies hanging upside down in the room. Looking at the dark room, for some reason Evan's heart started to beat faster, and his breathing became irregular. His body moved on its own, and he walked deeper into the dark room. The room was very big, and the bloody dead bodies were hanging everywhere. After walking for a minute, Evan suddenly stopped, and his eyes fell on a particular body that was hanging upside down. The body was of a male elf who had light green hair and a kind dash looking face. The elf's body was pale white, as if all the blood had been drained from it. Looking at the elf's body, for the first time in his life, Evan felt a deep sense of sorrow. But the sorrow he was feeling didn't last long, as a bubbling rage started to fill his heart. That brown-skinned guy is not simple. Mellard and I will handle him. Meanwhile, you guys capture that mixed-blood bastard, Kale said to the 6 Beastkin people who were standing behind him. These guys acting as Cedar was about to say something after hearing Kale, but before he could finish speaking, a cold demonic aura that was filled with intense killing intent erupted from beside him. Cedar looked at Evan, who was standing beside him with a shocked look on his face, and noticed that his eyes had turned completely pitch black. Before he could understand what was happening, Evan disappeared from the place where he was standing at a speed that Cedar couldn't follow with his eyes. Boom! A booming sound echoed out, and red blood splattered in the air as the head of one of the rank 1 core revolvers, who was standing behind Kale, exploded like a watermelon. Drops of blood and brain matter splashed on the faces of the other core revolvers, who were standing near the person whose head exploded, causing their faces to turn pale white. Cedar looked in the direction of the booming sound and saw Evan had somehow appeared behind the beast people. His whole body was covered in a black demonic aura, and a chilly killing intent was coming out of his body. Successfully harvested the soul of a peak rank 1 core evolver. Your agility has increased by 3 points. Chapter 735. The moment Evan saw the dead body of the green-haired elf in the dark room, anger that sought to destroy everything erupted from the depths of his soul. A strong urge to kill all the beast people who had come to capture him filled his heart. Your bloodlust skill has been activated. The killing intent filling Evan's heart reached a point where his bloodlust skill activated on its own, and as the bloodlust skill activated, he began to lose his sanity. Under normal circumstances, Evan wouldn't have lost his sanity due to his high spiritual power. However, at present his mind was extremely chaotic, and the overwhelming killing intent filling his heart was too much. Under the influence of the bloodlust skill, Evan's sanity was slowly slipping away. However, before an accident similar to the one that had occurred during his fight against Kazal in the Myriad Formation dungeon could happen, a strange power coursed through his body and prevented him from losing his sanity. Your bloodlust skill is resonating with your racial characteristics. Your unique skill, Bloodlust, has evolved into the racial skill Reaper's Wrath. The moment his bloodlust skill evolved, the killing intent Evan was emitting increased even more. However, instead of losing his mind due to the killing intent, Evan's mind became extremely clear. A strange energy flooded his body, and he felt the effects of the Reaper's Wrath skill, as all of his stat points increased significantly. With this increase, the details of the Reaper's Wrath skill also came to his mind, and he understood what was happening. Evan's eyes turned pitch black, and without waiting even for a second, he used the Shadow Possession skill, merging himself with Asher, who had the highest stat points among all of his Shadow Undead. Generally, Evan's appearance would have changed due to the Shadow Possession skill, but for some reason, this time his appearance remained the same even after merging with Asher. Although his appearance remained unchanged, the demonic aura around him intensified due to merging himself with Asher. Evan didn't stop after using the Shadow Possession skill, and used his newly gained authority. Death Guardian. Death Guardian Authority. Using the Death Guardian Authority, you can summon the Spirit of the Death Guard. The Spirit of the Death Guard will merge with you, and you will gain the invincibility effect for 5 seconds. During the invincibility effect, all your stats will be increased 5-fold, and you will not take any damage whether physical or spiritual. Death Guardian Authority can be used once every 7 days. The moment Evan used the Death Guardian Authority, a dark aura appeared around him, and his power increased to a completely different level. Although it seems like a long time has passed, but all of these things happened in a span of a few seconds. With a cold look on his face, Evan glanced at his stat points before disappearing from the place he was standing. Strength, 740. Agility, 660. Endurance, 665. World Essence, 760. Stamina. Intelligence, 640. Primordial Shadow Energy, 400. A/N. Look at the end of the next chapter to understand why Evan's current stat points are so high. Utilizing his high stat points, which were currently off the charts, Evan appeared behind one of the rank 1 core evolvers, who had come with Kale. Boom. After appearing behind him, he simply punched his head. Evan didn't use even half of his power in the punch, but the pressure that came from his punch was so high, that even before his punch touched the head of the rank 1 core evolver, it exploded like a watermelon, splattering blood and brain matter on the people who were standing near him. Successfully harvested the soul of a peak rank 1 core evolver. Your agility has increased by 3 points. 2 notifications flashed in front of Evan's eyes, but the ice-cold look on his face did not change. His eyes, including the sclera, were completely black, and the demonic aura that was always around him after evolving into an Eltherin was continuously increasing. The cold, demonic aura was filled with intense killing intent, causing all the people who felt it to freeze on the spot. Kale and the other beast people wanted to turn around and look at Evan, but their bodies were completely frozen under the effect of the chilling killing intent. Not only them but even Cedar was frozen on the spot. Although the chilling demonic aura and killing intent were not directed at him, he still felt his heart palpitating just by looking at Evan's icy cold expressions and pitch black eyes. Boom. Before Kale and others could understand how a beginner-level rank 1 core evolver like Evan could release such a terrifying aura, another booming sound echoed out, and the head of another rank 1 core evolver exploded. This time when the core evolver died, no notification appeared in front of Evan. Evan wasn't surprised when he saw there was no notification informing him about the increase in his stat points. The headless body of the core evolver dropped to the ground, causing the faces of Kale and the others to turn pale. Their seconds Evan looked at the remaining time of the Death Guardian Authority, and instantly appeared behind Kale, who was the peak rank 2 core evolver. Feeling Evan's presence behind him, Kale's heart turned cold, and without a second thought, he activated his zone. The moment Kale activated his zone, the surrounding area changed. A faint outline of an illusionary world filled with sharp metal energy covered an area of 10 kilometers. The metal energy flowed throughout the area, carrying a formidable force that threatened to tear apart everyone. The pressure exerted by Kale's zone was so intense that even a normal rank 2 evolver wouldn't be able to move freely under the power of the sharp metal energy. When Cedar noticed Kale's zone, his expression changed, and he was about to use his own zone. The power of a zone is far stronger than a domain, and Cedar knows that it is impossible for a beginner-level rank 1 core who didn't even create his domain to resist the power of a zone. He wasn't sure what happened to Evan, but it didn't matter to him because there was no way he would let him get hurt when he was the one who brought him out here. Just as Cedar was about to release his zone, useless, he heard Evan's cold voice, and the next second, boom, another booming sound echoed out, and Kale's head also exploded like a watermelon. Under the effect of the Death Guardian Authority, the power of Zone was completely useless against Evan. Chapter 736. Ethered. When Kale's body dropped to the ground, Mellard and the other beast people felt as if someone had poured icy cold water over their bodies, and all of them started to shake. Evan didn't care about their terrified faces, and fixed his pitch-black eyes on Mellard, the mid-level rank 2 core evolver. Sensing Evan's gaze on him, Mellard's face turned pale. Please forgive. Boom. Before he could finish speaking, his head also exploded like Kale's. The duration of the Death Guardian Authority was about to end, so Evan didn't care about what Mellard was saying and simply sent him off. Cedar watched as Evan killed Kale and Mellard as if he were killing some weak chickens, and his heart nearly jumped out of his chest. He had enough confidence that he could have killed Kale and Mellard without much problem if they had fought. However, he was absolutely sure that the fight wouldn't have been this one-sided. Evan basically killed them in less than 5 seconds, just by using some simple punches. What the FU*K is going on here? Cedar's mind was in complete chaos, and he wanted nothing more than to ask Evan what kind of FU*K drug he took to increase his power like this. When Evan killed Mellard, some notifications flashed before his eyes. Evan didn't bother with the notifications for the time being, and looked at the remaining 4 beast people. At this moment, the duration of the Death Guardian Authority ended, but Evan didn't care. Even without the Death Guardian Authority, his current stat points were not low, because the Reaper's Wrath and Shadow Possession skills were still active. Evan looked at the 4 remaining beast people, and saw one was a beginner-level rank 1 core evolver, while the other 3 were S-rankers. The faces of all 4 of them were pale white, and they were trembling under the killing intent and the demonic aura that Evan was releasing. Boom, 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 boom. 4 booming sounds echoed out, and the heads of all 4 people also exploded as Evan had no intention of letting them go. Once all the 8 beast people were dead, Evan took a deep breath and looked at the night sky. His eyes were still pitch black, and there was no expression on his face. "Are you alright?" Suddenly, Evan heard Cedar's concerned voice. He stopped looking at the night sky and turned his head towards him. When Evan looked at Cedar, he saw a concerned look on his face. "I am fine. Just give me a few minutes," Evan said, hearing Cedar. Although he wanted to speak in a normal voice, his tone still sounded cold. "Alright?" Cedar nodded his head, hearing Evan, and didn't mind his cold voice, as he could tell that he was still under the effect of a skill. Seeing Cedar nodding his head, Evan looked at his status window. Reaper's WRATH racial skill. The Reaper's Wrath skill has 2 effects, one passive and one active. Passive effect. The Reaper's Wrath skill increases the stat points of the user depending on their rage level. The higher the rage level of the user, the greater the boost they will receive in their stat points. While in rage mode, if the killing intent of the user surpasses that of the target will be immobilized and will not be able to move unless their willpower can overcome the killing intent. Active effect. Once every 2 months, you can use the Soul Harvest mode of the Reaper's Wrath skill for 5 minutes. Under the effect of the Soul Harvest mode, there is a 25% chance that you will absorb the soul of the target you kill. If you successfully absorb the soul of the target, you will receive 10% stats from any one of the target's stats. The stat is chosen randomly. Note: in order to receive 10% of the target's stat points, the target you kill must be at least 2 levels above you. Looking at the details of the Reaper's Wrath skill, Evan couldn't understand why his Bloodlust skill had evolved into this skill. He remembered that he had received his Bloodlust skill in a very unexpected way. During his fight against Kazal, he had lost his mind after merging with Albelu and using his unique skill, Bloodlust. While in the Berserk state, he somehow ended up acquiring the Bloodlust skill. At that time, he thought that there might be a small chance for him to receive the skills of his Shadow Undeads, whom he had merged with using the Shadow Possession skill. From that point onwards, he tried using all kinds of methods to permanently acquire skills from his Shadow Undeads, using the Shadow Possession skill. However, to his disappointment, he wasn't able to receive any skills from his Shadow Undeads after acquiring the Bloodlust skill. Could it be that I acquired the Bloodlust skill because it's somehow related to the characteristics of the Elfarin race, and it was already predetermined that I would evolve into an Elfarin in the future? Evan's pitch-black eyes flashed as he thought to himself. While thinking, the image of the dead green-haired elf whom he had seen in the darkroom once again came into his mind, filling him with a deep sense of sorrow. Who was that guy? Evan said, trying to remember if he could recall anything about that elf. But other than the fact that all the blood of the elf was drained, Evan could not recall anything about him. All the blood of that elf was drained, Evan thought, his eyes narrowing. Could it be that the elf is somehow related to the vampires? Just as Evan was thinking, the passive effect of Reaper's Wrath skill started to wear off, and his stat points returned to normal. Evan's eyes, which were pitch black, returned to normal as well, and the demonic aura and killing intent around him decreased quite a bit. Evan's original stat points: Strength, 38, Agility, 35, Endurance, 40, World Essence, 40, Stamina, 40, Intelligence, 35, Primordial Shadow Energy, 40, Ash's stat points: Strength, 36, Agility, 31, Endurance, 25, World Essence, 36, Stamina, Intelligence, 29. Evan's stat points after using the Shadow Possession skill: Strength, 74, Agility, 66, Endurance, 65, World Essence, 76, Stamina, Intelligence, 64, Primordial Shadow Energy, 40. Evan's stat points under the passive effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill: 2x boost. Strength, 148, Agility, 132, Endurance, 130, World Essence, 152, Stamina, Intelligence, 128, Primordial Shadow Energy, 80. Evan's stat points after using the Death Guardian Authority: Strength, 740, Agility, 660, Endurance, 665, World Essence, 760, Stamina, Intelligence, 640, Primordial Shadow Energy, 400. Chapter 737. When the passive effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill ended, Evan's stat points decreased quite a bit. Soon after, the duration of the Shadow Possession skill also ended, and Evan's stat points finally returned to normal. Although they had returned to normal, Evan felt that his agility and world essence were higher than before. He opened his status window, and saw his agility and world essence had increased because of the Soul Harvest effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill. As he was looking at his stat points, Evan suddenly noticed something and raised an eyebrow. What is this note beside my world essence? Strength, 38, Agility, 38, Endurance, 40, World Essence, 50. 10 points will be added when the rank of your core reaches the mid-level rank 1. Stamina, 40, Intelligence, 35, Primordial Shadow Energy, 40. Previously, Evan's agility was 35 points, and his world essence was 40 points. But now both of them were higher than before. Looking at the note beside his world essence, Evan suddenly thought about something. and looked at the notification that he had received after killing Melod, the mid-level rank 2 core evolver. Successfully harvested the soul of a mid-level rank 2 core evolver. Your world essence has increased by 20 points. 20 points. Evan raised an eyebrow when he saw the number of stat points he had received after killing Melod. He thought for a few seconds and finally understood what was going on. It seems my limit while being a beginner level rank 1 core evolver is 50 points. If I want to increase my stat points above 50, I will need to break through to the mid-level of rank 1, Evan muttered, looking at the small note beside his world essence. Evan was a little disappointed after learning that he would have to increase the rank of his core in order to surpass the 50-point mark. However, he was somewhat relieved that the stat points he received after killing Melod did not disappear and would be added to his stats as long as he increased the rank of his core. While Evan was looking at his status window, the active effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill, Soul Harvest, also ended, and the aura around him finally returned to its natural state. When Cedar noticed the natural demonic aura around Evan with no sign of killing intent, he sighed in relief and finally relaxed. Although Evan told him he was completely fine, he was still tense because of the killing intent that surrounded him during all this time. But seeing the killing intent around him disappear, he could finally rest easy. Once the killing intent surrounding Evan disappeared, Cedar looked at Kale's dead body and frowned slightly. His spiritual senses scanned Kale's body, and after a minute his eyes lit up. So that's how it is, Cedar muttered, and his eyes flashed with brownish light. Just as Cedar's eyes flashed, the ground around Kale's body moved, and a sharp earth knife tore open his right arm. Surprisingly, when the knife tore open Kale's arm, no blood flowed out. Instead, a layer of metal hidden inside his arm was revealed. The sharp earth knife easily sliced through the layer of metal, and the moment it was sliced open, a storage ring dropped to the ground from the gap in the metal layer. Seeing the storage ring, Cedar smiled and picked up the ring. To think he would hide his storage ring like this, Cedar muttered, smiling warily as he looked at the 8 storage rings in his hand. Suddenly, Cedar felt something and looked up. When he looked up, he saw Evan walking towards him. Cedar gazed at Evan for a few seconds. After confirming that there was nothing wrong with him, he smiled slightly and threw the 8 storage rings towards him. It seems it won't be long before you will be able to return the essence stones that you borrow from me. Evan was startled when Cedar suddenly threw 8 storage rings towards him, but he reacted quickly and caught them using wind manipulation skill. After catching the storage rings, he looked at Cedar and stayed silent. After a few seconds, he asked in a calm voice, "Do you want to ask something? Do you want to tell me?" Cedar didn't answer. Instead, he asked back. Evan stayed silent for a moment before eventually shaking his head. Honestly, he had quite a good impression of Cedar, but the problem was that even if he wanted to tell him, he didn't know what to say. He himself was confused about the whole situation, so there was nothing he could explain to Cedar. Seeing Evan shaking his head, Cedar just smiled and waved his hand. "If you don't want to tell me, it's fine. After all, everyone has their own secrets," Cedar said, looking at Evan deeply. But suddenly, Cedar's eyes turned sharp, and he said in a serious voice, "I hope that you don't have any ill intentions towards the Drades, otherwise, I will take you down even if I have to risk my life." Evan was surprised when he heard Cedar, but soon a smile formed on his lips, and he shook his head. "You don't have to worry about that. I have never thought about harming the Drades." Cedar looked at Evan for a few seconds, and when he did not detect any lie, he smiled slightly and nodded his head. He looked at the 8 dead bodies around them and asked in a calm voice, "Should I bury them in the ground?" Hearing Cedar's question, Evan immediately shook his head. "No, I have other plans for them." "Other plans?" Cedar raised an eyebrow hearing Evan and looked at him in confusion. Seeing the confused look on Cedar's face, Evan showed a smug smile and pointed his hand towards the dead body of one of the rank 1 core evolvers. Shadow Resurrection. The moment Evan spoke, the atmosphere around them changed. Cedar's eyes opened wide in disbelief, and he looked at the body of the rank 1 core evolver, with his mouth slightly open. The next second, BRZZ. The body of the rank 1 core evolver started to tremble and Poochie. The skin of the dead body was suddenly tore open, and a fountain of blood gushed out. Cedar, who was wondering what kind of plan Evan had for the dead bodies, was shocked, and he looked at Evan in disbelief. so he is planning to torture them even though they are already dead. Chapter 738. Why Shadow Resurrection failed. Evan looked at the notification in front of him with a blank look on his face. He glanced at the body of the rank 1 core evolver that had turned into a blood fountain and didn't know what to say. Suddenly, Evan felt something and looked at Cedar, only to see him looking at him as if he were a lunatic. Evan opened his mouth to say something, but before he could speak, Cedar shook his head. "You don't need to explain anything. I understand," Cedar said and laughed dryly. He paused for a second and, after some time, added, "Although I know I have no right to tell you, I would still suggest you leave this habit of yours, because it is not a good thing to torture the dead." Evan took a deep breath and used the Shadow Resurrection skill once again, without explaining anything to Cedar. This time, when Evan used the Shadow Resurrection, he didn't fail, and a black shadow emerged from the rank 1 core evolver. Seeing the black shadow that was releasing the aura of a peak rank 1 core evolver, Cedar stopped laughing, and his eyes nearly popped out of their eye sockets. "I wasn't torturing him. I was trying to turn him into an undead," Evan said in a flat voice, once he successfully turned the rank 1 core evolver into a shadow undead. "An undead," Cedar said in a trembling voice, looking at Evan in disbelief. "You mean all the monsters that you had summoned earlier were undeads?" "Yes," Evan nodded and added after a moment. "Actually, I am a necromancer." Cedar took a deep breath and looked at the shadow undead of the rank 1 core evolver, who had the beastly features of a tiger. Although Evan said he is a necromancer, Cedar knows that there is no way he is just a simple necromancer. He can create thousands of undeads who are at the same level or even higher level than him, Cedar thought, and felt his head spinning. Just what kind of head up concept is this? While Cedar was still confused, Evan ignored him and looked at the dead bodies of Mellard and Kale. His eyes gleamed as he observed them. Both of them were rank 2 core evolvers, and Evan was obviously excited to turn them into his shadow undeads. Just as Evan was thinking about turning them into shadow undeads, he noticed something, and his expression changed. "Where is the soul orb of this guy?" Evan frowned, looking at Mellard, who was the mid-level rank 2 core evolver. Because of the soul absorption skill, Evan could see the souls of the dead people, but there was no soul orb floating above Mellard. Just as Evan was getting confused, something clicked in his mind, and his expression turned ugly. He tried to use the Shadow Resurrection skill on Mellard, and the moment he used the Shadow Resurrection skill on him, a notification flashed in front of his eyes. Shadow Resurrection cannot be used on this target, as the soul of the target has already been absorbed by you. As expected, Evan sighed inwardly and shook his head. "So I can't turn him into a shadow undead, because his soul was absorbed by me under the effect of soul harvest, huh?" Evan looked at the body of the second peak rank 1 core evolver, who was the first to die, and saw that his soul orb was also missing. When Evan killed him, his soul was also absorbed by him under the soul harvest effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill, and his agility had increased by 3 points. Evan was a little disappointed that he couldn't turn the mid-dash level rank 2 core evolver into his shadow undead, but his disappointment soon disappeared as he looked at Kale's dead body. "It is good that the soul harvest effect of the Reaper's Wrath skill didn't trigger when I killed him," Evan said inwardly and took a deep breath. Other than Kale, there were still the bodies of 1 beginner dash level rank 1 core evolver and 3 S rankers. Evan knew that the moment he would turn the S rankers into the shadow undeads, under the effect of the growth link skill, they would immediately reach the beginner level of the rank 1 core evolvers. "I will turn the S rankers into shadow undeads later," Evan thought, looking at Cedar, who was still looking at the shadow undead of the peak rank 1 core evolver. It was not that Evan didn't trust Cedar, but the thing regarding the growth link skill was just too absurd, and he didn't want to tell anyone about it. Thinking about this, Evan put away the bodies of the 3 S rankers into his shadow storage. Noticing Evan putting away the bodies of S rankers, Cedar stopped looking at the newly created peak rank 1 shadow undead, and looked at him in confusion. Necromancers need dead bodies to use many of their skills, so Evan said with a shrug of his shoulders, seeing Cedar's confused look. "Oh." Cedar nodded his head hearing Evan and didn't ask anything. After putting away the bodies of the S rankers, Evan looked at the body of the beginner level rank 1 core evolver, and used the Shadow Resurrection. This time, the Shadow Resurrection was successful on his first try, and the Shadow Undead of the beginner level rank 1 core evolver soon appeared in front of Evan and Cedar. Although Cedar had already seen how Evan created the shadow undead of a peak rank 1 core evolver, he was still stunned when he saw another rank 1 undead. Evan didn't care about Cedar's shocked look, and his eyes finally fell on Kale's body. Without wasting any more time, Evan used his Shadow Resurrection skill on him. Just as Evan used the Shadow Resurrection skill on Kale, a black aura covered the surroundings. The primordial shadow energy inside Evan's core moved, and Kale's body started to shake. Evan watched everything with an excited look on his face, as he was about to get his first rank 2 shadow undead. Just as Evan was getting excited, a sudden notification flashed in front of his eyes, and Evan's mouth opened wide in shock. How is this possible? He muttered in a shocked voice, looking at the notification in front of him. Chapter 739. An S-rank vulture-like monster was flying high in the sky, looking for prey for its breakfast, when the two streaks of light, one brown and one black, neared it. Looking at the streaks of light that were coming towards it, all the fur on the vulture's body stood up to no end, and before it could understand what was happening, its body exploded into a blood mist due to the heavy air pressure brought by the streaks of light. The two streaks of light didn't stop even after the vulture exploded, and continued to move forward, tearing through the air. Cedar looked at Evan, who was flying beside him, and frowned a bit. What is wrong with him? He thought, looking at Evan, who had a lost expression on his face. Although Cedar was confused, he didn't ask anything, and both of them continued to fly towards the Star City. Just what the hell is going on here? Evan shouted inwardly, looking at the notification that he had received when he tried to turn Kale into a shadow undead. Shadow Resurrection can't be used on this target, as the level of the target is more than 2 levels above you. When Evan was in Aurora World, the rank of his core increased so fast that he never encountered a situation where he had to worry about not being able to turn his opponent into a shadow undead, due to his low rank. Because of this, he had completely forgotten about the restriction of his Shadow Resurrection skill. //Shadow Resurrection. You can use shadow energy to create a shadow undead from a corpse. The shadow undead will have the same level as the corpse from which it was created. You can use the skill on the corpses that are 2 levels above you. The chances of shadow resurrection failing increase, depending on the target's strength and the condition of its body. If a shadow undead is destroyed, you can summon it again using mana. According to the details of the Shadow Resurrection skill, Evan cannot use the skill on people who are more than 2 levels above him. Kale was a peak rank 2 core evolver 5 whole levels above him. Mid-level rank 1, peak level rank 1, beginner level rank 2, mid-level rank 2, peak level rank 2. According to his current level, he will need to become at least a beginner level rank 2 core evolver if he wants to turn Kale into a shadow undead. Actually, Evan can understand that there is always a limit to what a skill can do, and it is already quite absurd that he can create thousands of immortal undead, who can be 2 levels above him using the Shadow Resurrection skill. Moreover, he just has to increase the rank of his core 1 time, and once he becomes a mid-level rank 1 core evolver, he would be able to create beginner level rank 2 shadow undeads. Coupled with his broken authorities, skills, and overpowered core, he was sure that once he became a mid-level rank 1 core evolver, even a group of peak rank 2 core evolvers wouldn't be his match. Then the question was why Evan had lost expression on his face, after knowing he couldn't turn Kale into a shadow undead. The reason Evan had a lost look on his face after knowing he could only turn people who are 2 levels above him at most into shadow undeads was because of Asher. If the Shadow Resurrection only works on people who are 2 levels above me at most, then how the *k did I turn Asher into a shadow undead? Evan cried inwardly, feeling something was definitely wrong with his Shadow Resurrection skill. Evan had turned Asher into a shadow undead when he was in Aurora World. At that time, he was only an S-ranker. Since he was an S-ranker, the highest level of undead he could make at that time should have been a mid-level rank 1 core evolver. But despite the restriction of his skill, he somehow successfully transformed Asher into a shadow undead, who was 3 levels above him at that time. How was I successfully able to turn Asher into a shadow undead even though it should have been impossible? This was the question that was running through Evan's mind during all this time, and the reason he had a lost look on his face. He even checked the details of the Shadow Resurrection skill a few times to see if there was anything wrong with it, but there was nothing wrong with the skill, and its details were still the same. Asher, Evan thought inwardly and narrowed his eyes. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling that if he could find the answer to this question, he would be able to solve many mysteries about himself. If not for this feeling, he would have already stopped thinking about this matter. Should I try to use the Shadow Resurrection skill on a beginner level rank 2 core evolver? Evan said to himself with a pondering look on his face. A beginner level rank 2 core evolver is 3 levels above him, similar to Asher, who was also 3 levels above him at that time. As this thought came into his mind, Evan felt it would be very unlikely that he would be successful. Shadow Resurrection can't be used on this target as the level of the target is more than 2 levels above you. He looked at the notification he had received when he tried to turn Kale into a shadow undead. The notification clearly stated that he wasn't able to turn Kale into a shadow undead, because Kale was more than 2 levels above him, which means it is unlikely that he would be able to turn people who are 3 levels above him into a shadow undead. Damn Asher, just what was the reason I was able to turn you into a shadow undead? Evan cursed and looked at Asher, who was in his shadow storage. Just as Evan looked at Asher, suddenly, something clicked in his mind, and his eyes trembled. Don't tell me, Evan muttered in a low voice as he looked at Asher, who was in his shadow storage. Subconsciously, his spiritual senses moved on their own, and he looked at Alisia, who was playing cards with Alisia and others like a true gambler, and his breathing became heavy. Just yesterday, he was wondering how he was able to turn Alisia into a shadow undead, even though she was just an essence clone, and now he is facing another question as to how he was able to turn Asher into a shadow undead, despite the difference in their ranks. When Evan was thinking about Alisia's matter yesterday, he always felt as if he was missing something crucial. Even though he was aware that there was the conceptual energy of the soul mixed in his shadow energy, he still felt there was another reason why he was successfully able to turn Alisia into a shadow undead at that time. Looking at Alisia, who was an elf, and Asher, who was a demon, Evan's mind buzzed and he looked at himself. Looking at his appearance, which was similar to that of an elf, and the aura around him, which resembled that of a demon, Evan's eyes suddenly trembled. Elf, Demon, Elfarin. Chapter 740. Elf, Demon, Elfarin. As Evan spoke, he felt that he had discovered something, but before he could grasp the essence of his revelation, that flash of inspiration disappeared. It was as if the idea had been clear in his mind just a moment ago, but now it eluded him entirely. Evan frowned and tried to remember the revelation that had just crossed his mind when he contemplated the connection between Elfarin, elves, and demons. He even stopped thinking about the issue of Asher, and why he was able to turn him into a shadow undead. Instead, his entire focus shifted to trying to recall the revelation that had just crossed his mind a moment ago. However, despite thinking about it for a few hours, he still failed to remember the thing that had slipped his mind. We are about to reach the Star City. Just when Evan was lost in his thoughts, he suddenly heard Cedar's voice, and finally came out of the trance. When Evan came out from the trance, he couldn't help but frown, feeling a mild headache for some reason. He rubbed his temples and noticed that it was already close to afternoon, and they had been flying for more than 8 hours. Damn it, so I've been thinking about the same thing for more than 8 hours. Without realizing it, Evan was shocked as he finally realized why he was feeling a mild headache. Are you alright? Cedar asked when he saw the frown on Evan's face. During these 8 hours, he had tried to talk to him a few times, but he noticed that Evan was lost in thought and wasn't listening to what he was saying. Hearing Cedar, Evan realized that he had been acting like a retard for the past 8 hours, so he smiled awkwardly and nodded his head. I am fine, I was just thinking about something, he said, and changed the topic. By the way, how long will it take us to reach Star City? Cedar's mouth couldn't help but twitch when he heard Evan, and he pointed in front of him. Just look in front of you, and you should be able to see the outline of the city. Evan was stunned when he heard Cedar, and he quickly looked in front of him. When he did, Evan saw the outline of a massive city stretching to the horizon. He was still a few thousand kilometers away from the city, but he could still see the tall buildings reaching the clouds, and feel the majestic aura that the city was emitting. The Star City is a neutral city created by the top forces of Utopia. This city was jointly established by the top forces to properly manage the resources of the Dark Forest. Most people come here after gathering resources from the Dark Forest to trade them for something they need or to sell them, Cedar explained to Evan as they flew towards the city. You mean there is no absolute ruler in the Star City? Yes, unlike the cities of other kingdoms and empires. The Star City is a place that is jointly managed by the many forces of Utopia, so it is quite easy to buy things here. No one would care about your race or how you look, because this city is always full of people of different races. I see. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar, and understood why he came here instead of going somewhere else, even though they could have gone anywhere in Utopia using the teleportation building created by Ashley. In Star City, no one would care about him and Cedar, since there are always new people coming here from all over Utopia. But if both of them go to a city that is under the rule of a specific kingdom or empire, there is a chance they will draw some unwanted attention. The last thing Cedar wants in his current situation is to attract unwanted attention, as it would be dangerous not only for him, but also for the Drades. Although it has been thousands of years, the war between the Drades and Elves is still ongoing, and there are many people trying to find the hideout of the Drades in order to gain favor with the Elves. You should change your appearance as well, Cedar suddenly said, giving a mask to Evan. Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar, but he quickly understood why he asking him to change his appearance. Although the security in Star City is very good, and no one would be foolish enough to cause trouble in a place jointly managed by the top forces of Utopia, it's still better to exercise caution, especially since you look like a half-elf, Cedar said in a calm voice. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar and wore the mask. The moment Evan wore the mask, his appearance and aura started to change. In just a few seconds, similar to Cedar, he also transformed into a brown-skinned elf with shoulder-length hair. The demonic aura around him also changed, now closer to the natural aura of the elves. Evan didn't know why, but he felt quite uncomfortable when his aura and appearance changed. It was as if something inside him was dissatisfied because of the fact that he had changed his appearance. After a few minutes, Evan and Cedar finally reached the front of the city gate and landed on the ground. After landing, Evan saw two guards in silver armor standing in front of the city gate. Mid-level rank 2. He raised an eyebrow when he saw even the guards standing outside were mid-level rank 2 core evolvers. Let's go, Cedar said to Evan and moved towards the guards. He wasn't surprised by their level, as he already knew about them. In order to enter the city, Cedar paid 10 mid-level essence stones, 5 for him, and 5 for Evan. When Evan saw Cedar paying 10 essence stones, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. F***K, the people who are managing Star City must be swimming in money, just by collecting the entrance fees from the people who want to enter the city. You guys can enter once Cedar paid the entrance fees, one of the guards said, and allowed them to enter the city. Cedar looked at Evan, who was standing behind him, and both of them entered the city. Chapter 741. Star City is one of the largest cities in the world, covering an area of approximately 500,000 kilometers. There are a total of 16 entrances to enter the city, 4 in each direction. From these 16 entrances, millions of people enter and exit Star City every day. Thinking about the number of essence stones that the people controlling Star City earn just by collecting entrance fees, Evan felt his heart burn with jealousy. He also wanted to receive free essence stones from millions of people without doing anything. While feeling jealous, he followed behind Cedar and entered the city. Upon entering the city, Evan and Cedar couldn't help but gasp in surprise. Although Cedar knew about Star City because of the experience crystal that Sylvan had used on him, it was still his first time seeing a city outside the closed world of the Dryads with his own eyes, so he was naturally surprised. Meanwhile, Evan was surprised because of what he saw the moment he entered the city. What the hell is going on here? Evan asked himself with a dazed look on his face, as he watched people of the different kinds of races riding hovercars and other vehicles that looked like they came from a futuristic world. I thought I would see people riding expensive-looking carriages pulled by high-level monsters. But this, Evan thought, looking back at the entrance of the city, and wondered if he had perhaps traveled to a different world. After passing through the city gate, Just as Evan was still reeling from the sudden change in environment, he heard a loud noise emanating from the depths of the city. He turned to look in the direction of the noise, and his eyes widened in disbelief. That's Evan watched with his eyes wide open as a giant black airship, hundreds of meters long, ascended into the blue sky, and immediately turned into a streak of black light, disappearing from his view at a speed so fast that his eyes couldn't follow its movements, even with his current power. That was a rank 3 high-level airship. Evan heard Cedar's voice, and saw him looking in the direction where the airship had just disappeared with an envious look on his face. Hearing what Cedar said, Evan finally realized that these futuristic-looking things seemed to be quite normal in Utopia. I thought Utopia would be far behind in terms of technological progress, as most of the people here can use skills and artifacts to make up for all the things that they need. Evan thought inwardly, and looked at Cedar. Hey Cedar, is the technological advancement in Utopia very high? Evan asked, looking at the stylish hovercars as both of them strolled in the city. Cedar was looking around with a look of interest on his face when he heard Evan's question. Hearing his question, Cedar stopped looking around and nodded his head. Because of the Mechadroids race, the technological advancement in Utopia is very high. They can create the things that can even make disaster class existence drool. Cedar paused after saying this, then added after a moment, according to Grandpa Sylvan, the top creators of the Mechadroids race can even create weapons with a power level similar to that of a world-class expert. Even the airship that you just saw a moment ago was created by them. Mechadroids. Evan frowned, feeling as if he had heard about them somewhere before. Suddenly, a look of realization flashed in his eyes, and he finally remembered where he had heard about them. In the dream in which I saw Anastasia for the first time, Evan said inwardly, remembering how some of the people of Mechadroids race were also killed by the Shadow Monarch in that dream. EHP 366. Man, I'll need to be careful while using my Shadow Undeads. Otherwise, if people who have a grudge against the Shadow Monarch recognize them, they'll be coming for my neck, Evan thought with a speechless look on his face. By the way, you just said the level of the airship that just flew away was high-grade rank 3. Does it mean Mechadroids can even make rank 4 and even rank 5 airships that are on par with the speed of disaster class beings? Evan suddenly asked with a curious look on his face. Of course they can. In fact, if you provide them with enough resources and pay them dearly, they can even make a rank 6 airship, Cedar said without any hesitation. He paused and added after a moment, although the resources needed in order to create a rank 5 and rank 6 airship are something that even an Empire-level faction might not be able to collect easily. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar and didn't ask anything else. He is the fated boyfriend of the poverty, so there is no way he can afford things that even Empire-level factions find difficult to acquire. Continuing to dwell on these matters will only torment him further. Soon Evan and Cedar arrived in the market area of the city. You want to buy rank 1 herbs, right? Cedar asked once they arrived at the market area. Yes, Evan nodded and took out a list from his storage ring. Other than the herbs, I need these materials as well. Cedar looked at the names of the materials on Evan's list and raised an eyebrow. //1 kilogram dracorium, 200 grams eldrite, 2 soul blood crystals, 3 beginner level rank 1 monster cores, 5 mid-level rank 1 monster cores, 10 grams of arcanite, 1 space stone, 2 drops of time water. After reading the names of the material, Cedar looked at Evan with a strange look on his face. I know about most of the materials on the list. Monster cores, arcanite, eldrite, and dracorium are fine. But the other materials, he said and shook his head. I don't think you will be able to find them as they are very rare, and most people don't sell them in shops. Although Evan already expected this, he still couldn't help but frown upon hearing Cedar. After a moment of silence, his expression returned to normal, and he said in a calm voice, let's think about those rare materials later. We should focus on what we can obtain first. Chapter 742. In a dark space where nothing could be seen, a voice filled with anger sounded. You should stop now or it will be too late for you to regret. We didn't stop you before, but the things that you are doing now, we can't ignore them any longer. Don't think you can do whatever you want just because you were born with the ruler's authority. Azrath, can't you just fulfill your role as the Soul Keeper without causing so much trouble? I was trying to get some sleep when these guys dragged me here, breaking my beauty sleep because of you. There was a momentary silence in the dark space before a cold and indifferent voice rang out. I am not going to stop until I achieve my desired result. Hearing the cold and indifferent voice, the person who spoke in the beginning gritted its teeth. If you are really hell-bent on going down this path, then we will have no choice but to eliminate you. There was no response, but everyone present in the dark space knew what was going to happen next. Suddenly, a cold aura started to permeate the dark space. There is no point talking to him. Let's just eliminate him so that I can go back and take my beauty sleep. Soon, the energy waves that could destroy planets with ease swept in all directions, and the dark space started to break under the impact of the shockwaves. Using the power of these four, I should be able to complete the final step now. Before the dark space completely shattered, a low voice sounded, and everything turned into nothingness. Huff ***. Evan woke up in a dimly lit room and panted heavily. His bare-chested body was covered in cold sweat as he looked around him with a confused expression on his face. After looking around him for a moment, he finally realized where he was inside in relief. Damn these dreams! Evan waved his hand, and a gust of wind removed the curtains from the window, allowing sunlight to enter the room. As the sunlight illuminated the room, Evan leaned back on the bed and tousled his slightly sweaty hair. These dreams are becoming more and more frequent since I arrived in Utopia, Evan muttered with furrowed eyebrows, and sighed loudly. He looked out of the window and, seeing that the sun was already up, he stood up and went to the bathroom to take a bath and clean himself up. It's been 2 days since Evan and Cedar arrived in Star City. For the past 2 days, both of them have been looking for the items they need. Evan had already purchased all the herbs he needed to help Amara become a peak rank 1 alchemist. The herb costed him a total of 70,000 mid-grade essence stones, or in other words, 7 million low-grade essence stones. Although Evan's heart nearly leapt out of his chest when he heard the price of the herbs, he still purchased them because making Amara a rank 1 alchemist is his top priority for the time being. Once she becomes a rank 1 alchemist, he would be able to sell potions and pills created by her, earning back all the money that he is spending on her. Other than the herbs, he also searched for the materials that he had shown to Cedar. Unfortunately for him, just as Cedar said, some of the materials that he needed were very rare, and they were not able to find them anywhere in the Star City. The materials that he wasn't able to find were 2 soul blood crystals, 1 space stone, and 2 drops of time water. Other than these 3 materials, he purchased all the materials that he needed. 1 kilogram dracorium, 200 grams eldrite, 3 beginner level rank 1 monster cores, 5 mid-level rank 1 monster cores, and 10 grams of arcanite. These were the materials that he purchased in the past 2 days. And these materials cost him a total of 140,000 mid-level essence stones. The most expensive were the 5 mid-level rank 1 monster cores. 1 mid-level rank 1 core cost him 12,000 mid-level essence stones. If he didn't have the essence stones that he got after killing Kale and others, he wouldn't have been able to buy these things even with the help of the essence stones that Cedar had lent him. When Evan saw the monster cores of the ranked monsters for the first time, he wondered if he could increase the rank of his core by eating them just like how he used to. In order to test his theory, he purchased an extra beginner level rank 1 core. When he swallowed the core turned into energy and was absorbed by his primordial monarch core. However, Evan noticed that the energy of the core did not increase the rank of his core. Although the energy of the core did not increase its rank, Evan found that similar to before, he can still gain skills after swallowing the cores, and on top of that, now there is even a chance of receiving an authority of the monster from whom the core was extracted. Evan was quite excited after learning that he could even acquire authorities by absorbing the cores, but he didn't use his limited essence stones to buy cores, because buying the materials that he had shown to Cedar was his top priority for now. Evan needed these materials because he had a plan in his mind, and if everything goes according to his plan, he might even be able to kill peak rank 2 core evolvers, without the help of his shadow undeads. Similar to Evan, Cedar also bought many things. He had to purchase items not only for himself, but also for other dryads. So the amount of essence stones that he spent in the last 2 days was so high, that Evan even felt that Cedar's must be the boyfriend of the goddess of wealth. Around half an hour later, Evan emerged from the bathroom and used his wind manipulation skill to dry himself off. We will be leaving Star City tomorrow. I hope I will be able to find the things that I need by the end of the day, Evan said as he dressed himself. After putting on his clothes, Evan walked out of the room and knocked on the door of the room next to his. Chapter 743. Let's go to the eastern market of the city. That's the only place left where we haven't been. If we can't find the blood soul crystal and other things there as well, then we will return to the dark forest, Cedar said as he and Evan ate breakfast in the inn where they had been staying for the past 2 days. Evan nodded in agreement with Cedar, as he also didn't want to waste any more time in Star City. He wanted to increase the rank of his core to mid-level rank 1 as soon as possible, and create some rank 2 shadow undeads before the Tomb of the Ancient opened, so lingering in the city was not an option. Although Evan didn't ask Sylvan if he could enter the Tomb of Ancient along with Cedar and the other Dryads, he already had something in mind, and he was 90% sure that Sylvan would allow him enter the tomb with them after hearing his proposal. While they were eating breakfast, suddenly a discussion caught Evan's and Cedar's attention. Did you hear? Amber Nightfall is currently in the Star City, a bulky man with a scar on his face said to his companions. What? The companions of the bulky man were stunned when they heard him. Are you talking about the youngest daughter of the Blood Monarch? A man with a horn on his head asked with a shocked look on his face. Yes, the bulky man nodded his head. I heard she was training in the depths of the dark forest for the past few months, and is now planning to break through to the peak level rank 2, before the Tomb of the Ancient opens. Evan raised an eyebrow when he heard the man and looked at Cedar. Is the Tomb of the Ancient close to this place? Evan asked this question because in the past 2 days, he heard many people talking about how people from the surrounding small kingdoms were coming to the Star City, due to the Tomb of the Ancient. Now that he heard even a big shot is here, he thought maybe the Tomb of the Ancient is very close to the Star City. When Cedar heard Evan's question, he shook his head. The Tomb of the Ancient is located in the southern territory of Utopia, meanwhile the Star City is in the western territory, Cedar said, and added after a moment, as he already knew why Evan had asked this question. The reason people are gathering here is because there is a cross-territory teleportation formation in the Star City that can teleport people directly to the southern territory, where the Tomb of the Ancient is located. I see. Evan nodded his head in understanding hearing Cedar, and focused back on the bulky man. He wasn't interested in Ember Nightfall, whom they were talking about, but he was very interested in hearing about her father, Alistair Nightfall, who is one of the 5 monarchs. Evan already knew a few things about the 5 monarchs because of Cedar, but he still wanted to know more. Are you sure she is here to break through to peak level rank 2? Isn't she just 25 years old this year? I am already over 100 years old, but I am still stuck at the mid-level rank 1, a middle-aged looking man who was nearly 2 meters tall, asked in a voice filled with disbelief. Even Cedar couldn't help but raise an eyebrow when he heard the man. He was 27 years old, but he still needed at least a year or 2 before he could break through to the peak level rank 2. Evan noticed Cedar's change in expression and shook his head inwardly. He knew that Cedar's talent was quite good, but the problem was that it was hard for Drades to gather resources because of their situation. It was already quite absurd that he reached mid-level rank 2 at such an age without the support of many resources. Well, she is the daughter of one of the monarchs, so it is not surprising that she is already at the peak of rank 2, Evan said to himself as he finished his breakfast. From her birth, she must have been drinking higher-level potions instead of water, and eating pills like candies. After finishing his breakfast, Evan noticed Cedar was also finished, so both of them stood up to leave. Just when they were about to leave, the bulky man who was talking about Ember Nightfall seemed to remember something, and said in a voice full of envy, "By the way, I heard a rank 3 core evolver found an enlightenment stone in the inner area of the dark forest, and he is going to auction it off in this month's star auction, which is the day after tomorrow." What? The someone found an enlightenment stone, and he is going to sell it? One of the companions of the bulky man asked in a voice filled with disbelief. Cedar's eyes trembled when he heard the words enlightenment stones, and he once again sat down. Evan noticed the change in Cedar's expression, so he also sat down and looked at him curiously. Cedar, what is an enlightenment stone? Cedar looked at the bulky man who was talking about the enlightenment stone, and took a deep breath. Did you see the law room in your house? He asked Evan without looking at him. When Evan heard Cedar, he remembered the room that he had seen in the house. There was a formation in the law room, but it wasn't working, so he had thought it was broken and didn't care about it. Seeing the change in Evan's expression, Cedar nodded his head. The Enlightenment Stone is related to that formation, and if we can get a hand on it, Cedar said, and his eyes started to shine like stars. Evan was taken aback when he saw the look on Cedar's face. He knew about Cedar's personality, so he knew that his control over his emotions was very high. If even he is acting like this, then this Enlightenment Stone must be something great, Evan thought to himself, and wanted to ask more about this stone. But before he could, he felt a sudden change in the atmosphere, and noticed some people with deep red eyes and pale skin entering the inn. Chapter 744. Feeling the change in the atmosphere, Evan looked ahead and noticed 4 people with red eyes and pale skin entering the inn. The person in front of the group was a tall, handsome-looking man with shoulder-length silver-white hair. The man was a mid-level rank 2 core evolver, and a bloody aura surrounded him. When people present in the inn saw the man, all of their expressions changed. He is the bulky man who was talking about the Enlightenment Stone stiffened when he saw the man, and his eyes opened wide in shock. The companions of the bulky man were also stunned, and the atmosphere in the inn suddenly turned silent. Evan and Cedar looked around them with narrowed eyes, and quickly understood that the identity of the silver-haired vampire who just entered the inn was not simple. "Do you know who they are?" Evan asked Cedar using telepathy skills, after seeing the reaction of the people. Cedar shook his head upon hearing Evan, as he also didn't know the identity of the people who just entered. Although he knew many things about Utopia, it was still the first time he came out of the closed world of Drades. So it was not surprising that he didn't know anything about them. Since they are vampires, I think they must be related to that Ember Nightfall, Cedar said after a moment, and Evan nodded his head in agreement as he also thought the same. The 4 vampires didn't care about the reaction of the others, and simply sat down at one of the empty tables. Once seated, a waiter promptly approached them and took their order. Evan watched everything with a strange expression on his face, and vowed that he would never believe the things he had read in novels. I really want to meet the people who said vampires only drink blood and can't go out in the sun, Evan muttered inwardly as he watched the vampires ordering a normal breakfast like everyone else. According to what Cedar told him, vampires need blood from time to time, but it's not as if they only drink blood and don't eat anything else. Moreover, the sun has little to no effect on them. Vampires are weak against the fire element, but it's not surprising as all races have their own weaknesses. For example, demons are weak against the light element, and mechadroids are weak against the lightning element. That guy, he is Thomas Bloodworth, right? The son of the Duke Anderson Bloodworth. While Evan and Cedar were wondering about the identities of the vampires, they suddenly heard the voice of the tall middle-aged man, who was sitting with the bulky man. Upon hearing the middle-aged man, the bulky man nodded his head and looked at Thomas with fearful eyes. Alistair Nightfall rules over the Bloodmoon Empire. There are a total of 4 dukes under Alistair Nightfall, and all 4 of them are world-level experts. Duke Anderson Bloodworth is a beginner-level world expert, and is highly valued by Alistair Nightfall because of his talent. When Evan and Cedar heard the bulky man, a look of realization flashed on their faces, and they finally understood why people were looking at the rank 2 core evolver with such expressions. So he is the son of one of the dukes, how Evan's eyes flashed as he looked at Thomas. Cedar also looked at Thomas with curiosity, as similar to him, Thomas was also a mid-level rank 2 core evolver, and he wanted to know if he could win against him. After looking at Thomas for a moment, Evan glanced at the other 3 vampires who accompanied him, and noticed that all of them were rank 1 core evolvers. As Evan looked at them, his eyes flashed with confusion, and he felt as if he had seen them somewhere before. "We should leave from here." The vampires who came with Thomas are the ones who were camping outside of the dark forest. Suddenly, Cedar's voice rang in Evan's head, and he finally realized why the vampires who came with Thomas looked familiar. "Although you have changed your appearance, my appearance is still the same, so they might recognize us." Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar, and both of them stood up to leave. This Thomas must have been training with Ember Nightfall in the depth of the dark forest when we left, which is why we didn't see him at that time, Evan thought to himself as Cedar, and he walked towards the exit of the inn, after paying the bill. As Cedar and Evan walked towards the exit, one of the rank 1 vampires who came with Thomas looked at them, and his eyes narrowed upon seeing Cedar. Isn't he the elf whom we saw outside of the dark forest? He asked, looking at the departing figures of Evan and Cedar. Hearing him, the other two vampires who were camping outside of the dark forest with him looked at Evan and Cedar and nodded their heads. Thomas also glanced at Evan and Cedar without much interest, but upon looking at them, his eyes trembled and his authority, Guardian of Blood, activated on its own. The Guardian of Blood authority had two effects, one passive and one active. The name of the passive effect of this authority was Instincts, and it warned Thomas about the immense danger that one of the elves, who was leaving, posed to him. That elf is just a beginner level rank 1 core evolver. Then why is my life-saving authority warning me? Thomas narrowed his eyes as he watched Evan and Cedar leaving the inn. Seeing them leaving, Thomas contemplated for a moment, and before Evan disappeared from his view, he used the active effect of his Guardian of Blood authority, Foresight, that he can use only once a week. Using the Foresight effect of his authority, Thomas tried to deduce why the passive effect of his authority warned him about the rank 1 elf. The moment Thomas used the Foresight effect, his red eyes flashed with golden light, and he found himself standing in the middle of a barren land, devoid of any kind of life form. What is this place? Thomas frowned, surveying the desolate landscape around him. Suddenly, he felt something and looked towards the sky, which was a light brown color. Upon looking toward the sky, Thomas saw a drop of blood coming down towards him. The moment Thomas saw the drop of blood, all of his natural instincts started to scream. Thomas was shocked to feel such immense danger from a mere drop of blood. All vampires are born with the racial skill, Blood Feed. Because of this skill, vampires can drink all kinds of blood, and they can even increase their potential by drinking the blood of people whose potential is higher than theirs. For example, if a vampire's potential is rank 1 at best, they can increase their potential by drinking the blood of rank 2 core evolvers. Because of the Blood Feed skill, the blood of all kinds of species is like an elixir to vampires. Since Thomas is the son of one of the dukes of the Blood Moon Empire, he has drunk the blood of all kinds of species, including dragons, demons, and others. But it was the first time he was feeling danger from a drop of blood. Just when Thomas was feeling shocked by the dangerous aura coming from the drop of blood, the drop of blood started to shake, and an immense bloodlust engulfed the barren land. The ground started to crack, and the sky rumbled under the effect of the bloodlust coming from the drop of blood. Thomas's face instantly turned pale, and his body froze due to the overwhelming bloodlust. Just when Thomas felt he was going to die, the active effect of his authority, Foresight, ended and he found himself back in the inn, sitting with the other three vampires. Thomas's body was drenched in cold sweat, and his already pale face became completely white. The other three vampires were stunned when they saw Thomas's condition and asked him if he was okay. Thomas did not care about the concerned looks of the three vampires, and instead looked in the direction where Evan had left with trembling eyes. His blood, the blood of that elf, is dangerous. Chapter 745. After leaving the inn, Evan and Cedar didn't care about Thomas, and headed towards the eastern market of the Star City. While heading towards the eastern market, Evan thought about the Enlightenment Stone, and asked Cedar about it. The Enlightenment Stone is something that is useful for all the core evolvers regardless of their ranks, Cedar said upon hearing Evan. Using the Enlightenment Stone, you can create the law formation that you had seen in the house. If you cultivate inside the law formation, you will be able to sense the laws of the world more clearly. Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar. Cedar nodded his head and asked, "You are currently trying to transform your world essence into conceptual energy, right?" Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar. Seeing Evan nodding his head, Cedar explained, "In order to turn your world essence into conceptual energy, you must increase your understanding of the energy that you are trying to create. For example, I had turned my world essence into the conceptual energy of the earth," Cedar said as brown energy appeared on his palm. "The conceptual energy is the foundation of the law that you're trying to master. Since I turn my world essence into conceptual energy of the earth, it means that I'm trying to master the law of earth." Cedar paused and added after a moment, "The Enlightenment Stone is something that can help people feel the laws that they are trying to master more clearly. If you are a beginner level rank 1 core evolver, then with the help of a law formation created by the Enlightenment Stone, you can turn your world essence into conceptual energy, at least 3 to 4 times faster. A peak rank 1 core evolver can create their domain because they can feel the laws more clearly. or evolve their domain into a zone. Peak Rank 2 core evolvers can more easily evolve their zone into an illusionary world, and so on. No matter what your rank is, the Enlightenment Stone can help you progress faster. This is why it is one of the rarest treasures in Utopia. Evan was stunned hearing Cedar, and finally understood why he was so excited after hearing about the Enlightenment Stone. If he can get his hands on the Enlightenment Stone, it will be very helpful for the Dryads, who are trying to increase their power, Evan thought, and looked at Cedar. After looking at him for a few seconds, he couldn't help but ask, "Are you planning to participate in the auction to buy this Enlightenment Stone?" Yes, Cedar nodded his head without hesitation. Evan frowned upon hearing Cedar. Now that he knew the value of the Enlightenment Stone, he was sure that all the top forces present in Star City would try their best to compete for this stone. In front of these top forces, it would be almost impossible for them to get their hands on the Enlightenment Stone. Evan wanted to tell Cedar about this, but he stopped midway and closed his mouth. Cedar is not stupid, and he definitely knows that other high-class people of Star City will also try to buy the Enlightenment Stone. Evan thought inwardly and narrowed his eyes. Since he is going there even after knowing this, then it means that he must have something in mind. Although Evan was curious about what was in Cedar's mind, he decided not to ask anything. In about an hour, both of them arrived at the Eastern Market of Star City. "Let's hope that we will be able to find the things that you need," Cedar said to Evan once they reached the Eastern Market, and both of them started to look for the Blood Soul Crystal and other items. They went from one shop to another, and all the shopkeepers who heard the names of the items Evan and Cedar wanted couldn't help but look at them strangely. Some shopkeepers even asked them if they were trying to mess with them. Evan and Cedar were already used to these kinds of reactions from the shopkeepers, so they didn't care, and continued to look for the Blood Soul Crystal and other things. Around 10 hours later, as the sun was nearly setting, Evan looked at a small silver-colored stone in his hand, and sighed inwardly. "You are not going to lower the price?" he asked, looking at a Peak Rank 2 orc in front of him. The orc shook his head upon hearing Evan and said in a firm voice, 50,000 high-level essence stones is my bottom line. I can't go any lower. I have enough stones if you quote. Forget about it. I'm not in a hurry to buy the space stone." Cedar wanted to lend more essence to Evan, but Evan immediately rejected his offer. Cedar was planning to participate in the auction to buy the Enlightenment Stone. Although Evan didn't know how many essence stones he had, he was sure that he would need every single essence stone if he wanted to compete for the Enlightenment Stone. Seeing Evan reject his offer, Cedar wanted to say something, but before he could, Evan returned the space stone to the orc and dragged him away. "Let's go back. We've already looked at most of the shops, and I don't think we'll be able to find anything now." Cedar sighed upon hearing Evan, and both of them returned to the inn where they had been staying for the past 2 days. "The auction is the day after tomorrow. Let's leave for the Dark Forest after the auction," Cedar said to Evan once they returned to the inn. Evan nodded in agreement, and after eating dinner, they both retired to their rooms. The next day, Evan and Cedar roamed around the city and enjoyed themselves as they had nothing else to do. The whole day passed without them realizing it, and soon the day of the auction arrived. Chapter 746. Earth's strongest force in the northern territory of Utopia is Elvenshine, the Empire of the Elves. In the southern territory, Gehenna, the Empire of the Demons, is the strongest force. In the western territory, Bloodmoon, the Empire of the Vampires, is the strongest force. In the Eastern Territory, Frozen Monarchy, which is under Winterclaw's control, is the strongest force, and in the Central Territory, Celestria, the Empire which is under Akosha's control, is the strongest force. Evan and Cedar stood in front of a luxurious-looking giant building. People of all kinds of races were entering the building in an orderly manner, each with an expression of excitement. After observing the crowd for a while, Evan glanced back at the building and looked at the signboard that was flashing at the top of it with a bright red color, despite the fact that it was still afternoon. Bloodmoon Auction House. Evan read the name of the building and looked at Cedar. "This auction house is under the control of vampires, right?" Cedar also looked at the name of the building and nodded his head. The Star City is located in the Western Territory, so it's obvious that vampires will be the ones controlling the most profitable businesses. Although Star City is a neutral place, the influence of vampires is still the strongest due to the territory advantage. Evan frowned hearing Cedar, and a look of confusion appeared on his face. Since vampires have the territory advantage, can't they just control the entire Star City? I mean, I don't think other forces located in the other territories will be able to stop them if they decide to control the entire city, right? Evan asked, still looking at the auction building. Cedar nodded his head hearing Evan. You are right, the vampires have enough power to control the entire city. But he said, and a mocking smile appeared on his face, they can't do it because of the Overlord of the Dark Forest. Overlord of the Dark Forest. Evan was stunned when he heard Cedar and his eyes opened wide in shock. You mean the world-level monster who rules over the Dark Forest? Yes, Cedar nodded his head and said in a flat voice. Although we call the area around the Star City neutral territory, it is actually the area that is under the control of the Overlord of the Dark Forest. All the forces that are currently operating in Star City have some kind of agreement with the Overlord of the Dark Forest. If vampires tried to take control of Star City, it would be akin to taking control of the territory that is under the control of the Overlord of the Dark Forest, and this could easily provoke a war between the monsters of the Dark Forest and vampires. Evan raised an eyebrow hearing Cedar and asked in a doubtful voice, can the monsters of the Dark Forest fight against the vampires? Isn't the Blood Moon Empire the strongest force in the Western Territory? Cedar smiled upon hearing Evan and replied calmly, although the vampires are powerful, it will not be easy for them to defeat the monsters of the Dark Forest, especially if they engage in combat within the forest itself, where the monsters hold a natural advantage. Moreover, Cedar paused for a moment, then added with a sneer on his face, the other forces of Utopia will also not sit idly if vampires try to take control of the resources of the Dark Forest. So if a war between vampires and the Dark Forest were to break out, many forces would support the Dark Forest, and it would not be easy for vampires to contend against so many forces of Utopia. Hearing Cedar's explanation, a look of realization flashed on Evan's face and looked back at the auction building. Looking at the building, Evan couldn't help but think about how great it would have been if the Star City was under his control. Then he wouldn't have to worry about essence stones, and he could have easily bought the space stone that he had seen last night. Let's go, we should also line up, Cedar said to Evan after a moment, and both of them lined up behind the people who were entering the auction house. To enter the auction building, a person must have at least 100,000 mid-level essence stones or something of similar or higher value. If a person couldn't show enough wealth, then they wouldn't be allowed to enter the building. Although Evan had spent more than 200,000 essence stones in the last 2 days, he still had around 110,000 mid-level essence stones, because of the inheritance left behind by Kale and others. In just a few minutes, Evan and Cedar reached the front of the line. They showed their storage rings to the employee inspecting the entrance, and once the employee confirmed that they had enough essence stones, both of them were allowed to enter the building. Once inside the auction house, Evan and Cedar saw a female employee with 2 wings on her back approaching them. What do we have to do to get a private bidding room? Before the female employee could say anything after stopping in front of them, Cedar asked her in a calm voice. Evan looked at Cedar with a puzzled expression, not understanding why he wanted a private bidding room. However, soon something clicked in his mind, and he decided to stay silent. The female with the wings behind her back was also stunned because of Cedar's sudden question, but she quickly recovered and said with a professional smile on her face, Sir, to get a private bidding room during the auction, you must possess at least 500,000 high-level essence stones. Evan was stunned when he heard the requirement. He quickly converted the amount into mid-level essence stones, and couldn't help but inhale sharply at the realization. 50 million mid-level essence stones, Evan said inwardly as he gulped down his saliva. Cedar displayed no surprise upon hearing the female employee's words, and calmly presented her with a different storage ring than the one he had shown outside. When the female employee looked inside the storage ring that Cedar gave her, her eyes widened in shock. But she quickly recovered and handed the storage ring back to Cedar with trembling hands. Evan was stunned when he saw Cedar really had 500,000 high-level essence stones. He looked at him with disbelief and thought maybe he should have accepted Cedar's offer last night when he was giving him essence stones to buy the space stone. Please come with me, the female employee said to them after giving Cedar back his storage ring, and led them inside the building. While following behind the winged female, Evan suddenly thought of something and asked her, by the way, can we put our items up for auction? The female was surprised when she heard Evan, but she quickly nodded her head. Seeing the female nodding her head, Evan took out a storage ring and gave it to her. See them? I want to put them up for the auction. Chapter 747. This room is not bad, Cedar said while looking at the walls of the bidding room, once the female employee left. Evan nodded his head hearing Cedar, and looked at the auction venue through the glass wall in the room. From the glass wall, he could see thousands of people sitting in the auction venue, and all of them were quite excited. After looking at them for a moment, Evan turned around and looked at Cedar, who was munching on the fruits, while sitting on an expensive-looking leather couch that was present in the room. You want to know why I asked for the private bidding room, right? Noticing Evan was looking at him, Cedar asked with a smile on his face. Hearing Cedar, Evan shook his head and said in a calm voice, I already know you asked for the private room, because of the presence of the high-level core evolvers. Cedar showed a surprised look when he heard Evan and nodded his head. You are right, he said, popping a grape into his mouth. Because of the Enlightenment Stone, there will be many high-ranking core evolvers participating in the auction. Although the masks we are wearing can change our appearance and hide our aura, some high-level core evolvers with special skills can still see through our disguise, so we need to avoid their detection. After saying this, he looked at the walls of the room and smiled. The walls of the private rooms are covered with the high-level formations, so people won't be able to see us if we bid from here. Evan nodded his head in understanding, and once again looked outside from the glass wall. By the way, I didn't expect you to have those kinds of pills. Especially the source pill that you gave her in the end, Cedar suddenly said, remembering the things that Evan gave to the winged female for the auction. I was lucky enough to get them while I was in the world domain. Evan shook his head and said in a calm voice, World domain. Cedar raised an eyebrow hearing Evan and looked at him in confusion. What world domain? Evan, who was looking outside from the glass window, turned back and looked at Cedar with a strange look on his face. You know about the Tower of Ascension, but you don't know about the world domain. Cedar shook his head, hearing Evan, and said in a voice filled with confusion, Grandpa Sylvan had told me all about the Tower of Ascension, but he never mentioned anything about this world domain you are talking about. In fact, even in the books that I read about the Tower of Ascension, I have never seen anything about the world domain. Evan frowned upon hearing Cedar and narrowed his eyes. Logically speaking, the people of Utopia should be aware of the world domain, because all the people who come here from the lower worlds have to pass through the world domain. There are millions, or even billions, of people who have come to Utopia using the Tower of Ascension in the past thousands of years, so information about the world domain should have already been widespread. But Cedar is saying there is no mention of the world domain even in the books regarding the Tower of Ascension. Maybe there is no mention of the world domain in the books, because it's very basic knowledge, and Cedar doesn't know about it, because this is the first time he came out of the closed world of the Drades. Evan thought to himself and the frown on his face disappeared. Seeing the frown on Evan's face disappear, Cedar once again asked him about the world domain. There was still quite some time left before the auction started, so Evan told him about the world domain. Of course, he didn't mention anything about his title owner of the Eldoria city, as it was better not to tell anyone that he could go back to the world domain using this title. When Evan finished telling Cedar about the world domain, Cedar was completely shocked. To think there is a world that is connected with all the lower level worlds, Cedar said in a dumbfounded voice, and could not understand why Sylvan didn't tell him about such an amazing place. So you helped the 4 great clans of the world domain, and they gave you all of those things as a reward. Huh? Cedar nodded his head in understanding, and looked at Evan in admiration. He was glad that Evan had helped people of the 4 great clans who were trapped in the world domain to escape from there. As he is also living in a closed world, he knows very well the feeling of being trapped in a single place without being able to go out. Evan felt strange when he saw Cedar looking at him in admiration, after hearing how he helped the 4 great clans of Eldoria City. I wonder what he will think if I tell him that. At first, I was planning to rob the people of the 4 great clans, Evan said inwardly, and decided not to tell Cedar about all of these things. As they were talking, the lights of the auction venue suddenly dimmed. Evan and Cedar looked outside from the glass wall, and saw that all the seats in the auction venue were already full. There was a space expansion formation engraved in the auction house, so it could easily hold more than 50,000 people. Despite the fact that there were 50,000 seats, Evan and Cedar noticed that not even a single seat was empty. "Looks like people are really fired up because of the Enlightenment Stone," Evan muttered when he saw the number of people present in the auction venue. Cedar nodded his head upon hearing Evan, and looked at the people with a serious expression on his face. While Evan and Cedar were looking at the people, a handsome looking man with deep red eyes and pale skin, wearing a black suit, appeared on the stage, and the auction finally started. Chapter 748. Why author's note. In some of the previous chapters, I accidentally converted the essence stones at a ratio of 1:1000 instead of 1:100. I have already corrected the mistakes that I found. Sorry for the inconvenience. There were a total of 50 private bidding rooms in the auction house. To secure a private bidding room, one needed to possess at least 500,000 high-level essence stones. Due to this stringent requirement, only 33 private bidding rooms were occupied when the auction started. Evan and Cedar were inside room number 25, and were looking at the vampire who just appeared on the stage. Not far away from their private bidding room, in room number 1, Thomas was also looking at the auction venue through the glass wall, with no expression on his face. As he looked at the venue, the door of his room opened, and a woman with 2 wings on her back entered. "Master Thomas, the 2 elves you mentioned are currently in room number 25, she said upon entering the room. She was the same employee who led Evan and Cedar into the private bidding room. Hearing the winged woman, Thomas did not look at her and just waved his hand, telling her to leave. Once the woman left, Thomas took a deep breath, and his red eyes flashed. After the incident at the inn, he had inquired the 3 vampires about Cedar, whom they had seen coming out of the dark forest. The 3 vampires were confused when Thomas suddenly asked them about Cedar, but they told him how he left the dark forest with a person who looked like a half-elf. When Thomas heard Cedar left the forest with a half-elf, he immediately connected the dots, and came to the conclusion that the beginner-level brown-colored elf who gave him the dangerous feeling was actually the half-elf who left the forest with Cedar, and he was using an artifact to change his appearance. As for the reason why he felt a lethal threat from his blood, Thomas could only think that because of being a mixed blood, Evan's blood went through a mutation and turned into something that is dangerous for people. After concluding that Evan possesses special blood, Thomas asked people to keep an eye on him. Although he wasn't 100% certain, Thomas was at least 99% sure that Evan's blood was very special, and if he somehow successfully absorbed that blood using his blood feed racial skill, his potential would definitely increase, and he would be able to progress even faster. After absorbing his blood, I might be able to catch up with Ember, Thomas thought inwardly, and his eyes glowed. Although I can't start any trouble in the Star City, it won't be difficult to capture him once he left the city. While Thomas was lost in his thoughts, the auction finally started. "Welcome to our auction, ladies and gentlemen. I, Lucius Crimson, will be your auctioneer for today," the handsome vampire who appeared on the stage said with a smile on his face. Evan looked at Lucius from the glass wall, and couldn't confirm his rank. "He is a beginner-level rank 3 core evolver," Cedar said in a low voice, shocked that even the auctioneer was a rank 3 core evolver. Rank 3 Evan was also stunned when he heard Cedar, and looked at the handsome vampire with a frown on his face. In fact, it was not only Evan and Cedar, even the other people who came for the auction were stunned as well. Lucian was the vice manager of the Blood Moon auction house, and he had quite some reputation in the Star City, so people were surprised that he was acting as auctioneer today. But soon people thought about the Enlightenment Stone that was the focus point of the auction, and all of them understood why he was here. Lucian didn't care about the murmuring of the people, and said in a loud voice that spread throughout the auction venue, "Just like always, today, we once again have many treasures, artifacts, pills, and other things that we are going to auction off," Lucian said, and paused for a moment. He looked at the people who were staring at him intently and smiled. "And of course, as all of you already know, we also have the rare Enlightenment Stone that all of you want, so without further delay, let's start the auction." Lucian looked behind him, and a beautiful beast woman with fox ears brought something covered with a red cloth. The fox woman stopped near Lucian, and he removed the red cloth, revealing a light blue sword that was emitting a chilly aura. This is a beginner level rank 2 sword, Glacial Edge, Lucian said as he picked up the sword. He imbued his world essence into the sword, causing it to glow with a light blue color. This sword is made from the bones of a rank 2 frost echidna and hurricane star. Using the sword, Lucian lightly slashed upwards, and an icy hurricane that could easily freeze a normal beginner in mid-dash. Level rank 1 core revolver erupted from the sword. The icy vortex surged towards the ceiling of the auction house, and just when the icy hurricane was about to reach the ceiling of the auction house, a golden formation glowed, and the icy hurricane disappeared. People who witnessed the power of the casual slash of the Glacial Edge sword were stunned, and their eyes lit up with excitement. Seeing the fiery gaze of the audience, Lucian grinned. Let's start the auction. The starting bid for the Glacial Edge will be 15 million low-level essence stones, and the increment will be 500,000 low-level essence stones each. 16 million essence stones, 16.5 million essence stones, 20 million essence stones. The moment Lucian finished speaking, people started to bid crazily. Evan looked at the people who were bidding crazily and decided to keep his mouth shut. Only stupid people need a sword. My fists are hundreds of times better than the swords. Evan comforted himself and nodded his head. That sword is impressive, but even a rank 2 core revolver will find it hard to use it. Evan suddenly heard Cedar's voice and saw him shaking his head. What do you mean? Evan asked with a look of confusion on his face. In his opinion, the sword was actually quite good. Although he was in the private bidding room, Evan could still tell that the casual slash Lucian had demonstrated earlier was powerful enough to turn any normal rank 1 core revolver into an ice statue. When Cedar heard Evan, he looked at smiling Lucian and said with a sneer on his face, "That sword requires a very high amount of world essence to release such an attack that he demonstrated earlier. Even a beginner level rank 2 core revolver can only unleash 2 or 3 attacks of that level from the sword before running out of world essence." Just 2 or 3 attacks. Evan was stunned when he heard Cedar, and finally understood why he said that the sword was not easy to use. If even a beginner level rank 2 core revolver can only use that sword 2 or 3 times, then doesn't it mean I can only use it for 1 time before running out of the world essence? Evan said inwardly, and looked at the people who were bidding crazily, with a strange look on his face. 33 million essence stones. 40 million essence stones. The price of the sword continued to increase, and in the end, it was purchased by someone from private bidding room number 12. 45 million low-level essence stones. Evan muttered with a dazed look on his face, and did not know what to say. In the past 2 days, he had spent around 200,000 mid-level essence stones, equivalent to 20 million low-level essence stones, purchasing hundreds of different kinds of herbs, monster cores, and different kinds of high-quality materials. But the person who bought the sword spent 45 million on a single thing. Other than being shocked, Evan was also a little excited. Since all of these people are spending money crazily, then the things that I put for the auction might also be able to fetch a sky-high price. Evan said to himself and thought about the space stone that he had seen yesterday. If things go as I planned, then I should be able to buy the space stone even though its price is 50k high-level essence stones. Chapter 749. EI 300,000 mid-level essence stones. 310,000 mid-level essence stones. 310,000 once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 356, Lucian announced with a smile on his face. They were just 10 mid-level rank 2 pills, but they were still sold at such a sky-high price. Evan muttered in a dazed voice, feeling even more determined to turn Amara into a high-level alchemist. She is undead, so she should be able to work 24/7 without taking a break, right? Evan thought to himself, his expression resembling that of capitalists who exploit their employees for their own gain. Amara, who was inside Evan's shadow storage, suddenly felt a chill run down her spine, and felt that someone was scheming against her. She cast a vigilant gaze toward Alisia, who was some distance away, and decided to move away from her. Alisia looked at Amara, who was backing away from her, and felt confused. She couldn't understand why Amara looked at her as if she was some kind of terrorist. While Evan was thinking about exploiting Amara, the fox woman had already brought the next item for the auction. Surprisingly, this time, the fox woman brought more than one item at the same time for the auction. When people looked at the items that the fox woman brought, they saw there were nearly 15 items, and all of them ranged from B rank to S rank. Although most of the people participating in the auction were core revolvers, it doesn't mean there were no S rankers or lower level individuals. Amongst the people present in the auction house, around 20% people were below rank 1. When Evan noticed the items that appeared on stage, his eyes lit up because he was the one who placed those items for the auction. In the world domain, he had received many artifacts from the 4 great clans. Now that he and all of his shadow undeads were rank 1 core revolvers, all of those items were pretty much useless to them. So instead of keeping them to collect dust inside his shadow storage, Evan decided to put them into the auction to see if he could get some extra essence stones. These artifacts are very useful for all the people who are still below the rank 1, Lucian said once everyone saw the items. There are a total of 15 artifacts here, and we are going to auction all of them at the same time. The starting bid will be 1 million low-level essence stones, and the increment will be 50,000 essence stones each. 1.1 million, 1.4 million, 1.8 million. Soon the people who were interested in the artifacts started to bid. Evan watched people bidding for the artifacts and nodded his head. Although the price of the artifacts below rank 1 was not as high as the sword, he was still glad that people were at least bidding for them. 3 million, 3.7 million. The bidding lasted for a few more minutes, before all the artifacts that Evan placed were bought by an A+ ranker, with 5.1 million low-level essence stones. Getting 50,000 mid-level essence stones in exchange for those useless artifacts is not a bad deal. Evan nodded his head with a satisfied expression when his artifacts were sold for 5 million low-level essence stones. Our next item is a bit special. Although only people who are below rank 1 can use it, I am sure all of you will be very interested in it, Lucian said, and the fox woman brought a pill bottle. When people heard Lucian, their curiosity skyrocketed and they looked at the pill bottle with curious looks on their faces. Once the fox woman handed the pill bottle to Lucian, Lucian opened it and showed a golden-colored pill to everyone. When people saw the pill, their expressions, especially those who were below rank 1, changed. Source pill, a rank 1 core revolver said, and looked at the pill with narrowed eyes. Source pills are very rare because the main ingredient that people need in order to create source pills is the source liquid, and it is an extremely rare treasure. In order to become a rank 1 core revolver, S rankers of Utopia need to use a source pill. Without it, they can't break through beyond S rank and become a rank 1 core revolver. Not only S rankers, but even those who have already become core revolvers were also interested in the source pills, because by using them, they can help individuals close to them or their subordinates, who are still S rankers, to become rank 1 core revolvers. When Evan saw the reaction of the people after seeing the source pill, his heart skipped a beat. Although he expected that the source pill would not be cheap, he did not expect this kind of reaction from the people. Just by looking at the fiery eyes of the people, he could tell that all of them were very interested in the source pill. Lucian was also very happy when he saw the reaction of the people, so without wasting any time, he started the auction for the source pill. There are a total of 10 source pills, and we will be selling all of them at the same time. The starting bid will be 1 million mid-level essence stones, and the increment will be 100,000 essence stones each. When Evan heard the starting price of the source pills, his mind went blank. He felt he might have misheard Lucian, so he was about to confirm the starting price with Cedar. But before he could confirm the price, the people who were interested in the source pills started to bid. 1.2 million mid-level essence stones, 1.5 million, 1.6 million. When Evan heard the amount that people were bidding, he came back to his senses, and his eyes opened wide in shock. F***K, I am rich. Chapter 750. EI 1.8 million mid-level essence stones. 2 million. Evan was stunned when he saw the way people were bidding for the source pills, and his mind went blank for a moment. If people continue to bid like this, then you might be able to get enough essence stones to buy the space stone. Evan heard Cedar's voice, and noticed he wasn't surprised by the fact that people were bidding crazily for the source pills. Hey Cedar, I know source pills are rare, but isn't this too much? I mean, the source pills I put for auction are just low-level pills, so why are they acting like this? Cedar rolled his eyes when he heard Evan. Although they are low-level source pills, they can still give S-rankers a chance to become a rank 1 core evolver. There are many people who are stuck at S rank because they were not able to get their hands on a source pill. But now that there are 10 source pills in front of them, do you think they will let them go easily? Hearing Cedar, Evan looked at the people who were bidding for the source pills, and noticed that most of them were S-rankers, and all of them had desperate looks on their faces. So that's how it is. All of these people are stuck at S rank for so long, that they don't care about the price or the level of the source pill anymore. They just want to get their hands on it, so that they can become a rank 1 core evolver. Evan thought inwardly, and shook his head. Suddenly, he remembered something and looked at Cedar with a strange look on his face. By the way, you are not interested in source pills. Earlier when I asked if you needed those pills for other dryads, you told me to put them up for auction. Why is that? Before giving source pills to the winged woman to put them up for auction, Evan had asked Cedar if he needed those pills for other drades. But Cedar told him he didn't need the source pills, and asked him to put them up for auction. Dryads don't need source pills to become core evolvers, Cedar said when he heard Evan. Once a dryad reaches S rank, and if they have the potential to become a ranked evolver, the world tree can help them evolve their core to the next rank. Evan was stunned and felt as if something clicked in his mind when he heard Cedar's words. Source world tree, he muttered and frowned deeply. He felt he was very close to discovering something important, but couldn't take the final step. This feeling was very similar to what happened to him a few days ago, when he was trying to think about how he was able to turn Asher into a shadow undead. Damn, don't tell me this thing is related to the destruction of the universal tree that I saw when I entered the closed world of dryads for the first time. Evan rubbed his eyebrows, and felt a mild headache. 2.7 million, 2.8 million, 2.8 million going once, going twice, 3 million. The price of the source pills continued to increase, and soon reached 3 million. I need 5 million mid-level essence stones to buy the space stone. Evan stopped thinking about the world tree when the price reached 3 million, and looked at the people who were bidding with a hopeful look. In just a short period of time, the price reached 4 million. When the price reached 4 million mid-level essence stones, the bidding finally slowed down. Most of the high-ranking evolvers were here to try their luck on the Enlightenment Stone, so they didn't want to spend too much of their wealth on the pills. On the other hand, S-rankers and the low-level core evolvers who were bidding for the pills were reaching their limit. 4.3 million. 4.3 million going once, going TW quote. 4.5 million. This gentleman, whose face is not as handsome as mine, just bid 4.5 million essence stones. Anyone willing to bid higher? Lucian said and looked at the people. When no one raised the price even after a few seconds, Lucian smiled and clapped his hand. Since no one is raising the price, these source pills are sold to bidder number 897. Congratulations. Damn it. Couldn't these people have raised the price a little more? Evan said in a slightly annoyed voice. When the pills were sold for 4.5 million essence stones, he needed 5 million essence stones to buy the space stone, and he was still a little short of reaching his goal. Well, whatever. I still have that thing left. Evan shook his head after a moment and stopped thinking about the space stone. The next item we are auctioning off, although not as rare as the Enlightenment Stone, is still something many of you will not want to miss out on, Lucian announced loudly after the source pills were sold, then glanced behind him. Soon the fox woman brought a storage ring and handed it to Lucian. The next thing we are going to auction is something that was provided to us by the genius artifact refiner of the Star City, Master Arden, Lucian announced, and the next second, an airship that was 10 meters in size appeared on the auction stage. The expressions of the people in the auction house changed when they heard the name of the artifact refiner and saw the airship that Lucian had taken out from the storage ring. A mid-level rank 3 airship, Cedar muttered in a stunned voice, and looked at the airship with shining eyes. The people who were present in other private rooms were also stunned when they saw the jet black airship, and their expressions changed. Lucian was very satisfied when he saw the expressions of the people, so he nodded his head and announced, the starting bid for this airship will be 500,000 high-level essence stones, and the increment will be 50,000 essence stones each. What the Evan sucked in a breath of cold air when he heard the starting price for the rank 3 airship, and looked at Lucian in shock. 500,000 high-level essence stones were equivalent to 50 million mid-level essence stones. Evan was still shocked after hearing the price when people who were interested in the airship started to bid. 550,000, 700,000. Most of the people who were bidding were from the private rooms, as only they had enough wealth to bid for the airship. Evan gulped upon seeing the way people were increasing the bid, and vowed that in the future, he would definitely create a shadow undead, who would be able to refine artifacts. Suddenly, he noticed Cedar pressing the red button in front of him, that could be used to bid for the items. Don't tell me he is also. Evan was stunned when he saw Cedar also wanted to bid for the airship. He wanted to remind him that he was here for the Enlightenment Stone, but before he could say anything, Cedar pressed the button and announced his bid. 3 million high-level essence stones. The rowdy auction venue suddenly became deadly silent. This is the end of this video. Thank you guys for listening. Hope you enjoyed and wish you wonderful rest of the day. The silent ruptures out.